least he has a haircut. He's already one step ahead of you, Ben. No, you don't.
Got one left.
No, we're gonna take a real quick safety brief and then get this going. Appreciate everybody coming out. I'm Matt Pranka. Hopefully you know who I am. You know who this guy is.
God damn.
What?
No, everybody knows. That's great.
That's Ben Stoeger. Appreciate everyone coming out. Go over some admin stuff real quick. 4 basic safety rules are in effect. Treat every weapon as if it was loaded, even after you ensured it to be unloaded. Keep your finger straight off the trigger, outside the trigger guard, to up on target with the intention to shoot. Never let your muzzle cover anything you're not willing to destroy. Know your target and consider its background. Throughout these next 2 days, we're going to be doing a lot of training that's dynamic, where guys will be shooting at kind of disconnected yard lines. We take go through a lot of effort to make sure the angles, everything is very safe. We've never had an issue doing this type of training, but if we put you on anything that you're just not comfortable with, by all means let us know and we can talk about it, and change it so that you are comfortable. Once we start moving and get real aggressive, right, need guys to pay attention to the safety rules, right? Anytime you're moving with your rifle, that needs to be on safe, finger off the trigger, right? And maintain control of it. Same thing with the pistol. If your pistol has a safety, keep it on safe, but at a minimum, finger straight off the trigger and outside the trigger guard while we're moving. We're gonna be going back and forth between rifle and pistol throughout the day, because typically with the heat, as it gets hot in the afternoon, we're not going to get a lot of reps with the rifles before they're almost too hot to touch. So we'll do concepts with pistol, and then we'll flip those concepts over and work on them with rifle. And then tomorrow training will be kind of disconnected, where we'll have a bunch of drills set up where we're applying these concepts. Sounds good? With that said, you can be full up on all your pistol. We're going to start with pistol today, so let's come down to the 7-yard line and get this going.
We're going to start with marksmanship fundamentals. We're going to do that probably a little bit differently than what you normally do. We call this inductive learning strategy. So what you're going to do is shoot the gun really aggressively and then figure out what you're doing right or wrong. We're not really outcome focused here. We're going to be process focused. I'll show you, but it'll make sense in a second. All right, so the exercise is pretty simple. I'm going to draw the pistol, grip it in a way that I judge is acceptable, and then fire 4 pairs. Okay, here we go. Okay, so as you can see here, I'm going to look at a small spot on the target, draw the pistol, pistol comes up, I'm looking at that spot, pair, 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 pair. It's critical to understand here, we are not assessing the draw time, and we're not assessing the time between those pairs. Like, what I want is, like, you get the gun up and, yeah, I'm good with this grip. And I shoot. And then I fire the pair of shots, I'm like, do I understand what did I see, what just happened, all of that, okay? And then so on. So all that you should be paying attention to is when you fire that pair of shots, like, what is happening? How's the gun behaving, and what are you seeing from the sights? Okay, let's talk about how to grip the pistol. Everybody agrees probably that this is very dumb, the way I'm holding this. I hope we all agree with that. All right, so I'm gonna look at a small spot on the target and fire 4 pairs. Okay. Was the outcome there as bad as you would have thought? No. I mean, it wasn't great, but it wasn't as bad as you would have thought. So before we start talking about the mechanics, how we're holding the gun, the most important thing, like 80% of this, is the principles that are important here. So you see I'm holding the gun and shooting, and what I'm focused on is picking a small spot on the target and then not torquing the pistol around or putting a lot of input on it. Now, that technique was bad. That is not the technique we want you to do. It took a lot of conscious effort for me to shoot that way, right? So that wouldn't be the way to do it. Like, all my brain power sounds, all right, just don't push the gun down. Don't push the gun down, right? However, it's still, if I don't violate the principle of, like, yeah, look at a small spot and don't torque the gun, like, that's 80% of the outcome here is going to be tied to that, right? Now, to make that easier, so it doesn't take as much conscious effort, we're going to focus on how you hold the gun. Okay, I think everybody with their firing hand is going to look like this, yeah? I think so. It's not really a very interesting question, like, hey, how do I position my hand on the gun here? What I want you to pay attention to is the pressure, okay? So you should hold the gun so it's not moving around inside of my grip, like the gun is, it's not going anywhere, all right? Then I'm gonna tense up my forearm enough that I lock my wrist. So the gun, like my wrist is not gonna be a pivot point here, and that's all I have to do. Hold the gun so it doesn't move, lock my wrist so I don't create a pivot point. That's it. Any more pressure than that, you're gonna find that to be counterproductive. So like all these muscles are connected, of course. So the more pressure I put down on my hand here, the more difficult it is to move my finger quickly and independently, okay? So it's like, for most of you, in your brain, like your perception will be that you're holding the pistol really loose. Like you're like, yeah, man, I'm hardly holding on to it. Like most people's tendency, they'll like draw the gun, their death grip, like death grip on the gun, like as hard as they can. And then it's very difficult to move their finger quickly and independently. And also in their head is, I need to make sure the gun doesn't rise up and recoil a whole lot, okay? I don't want you to think like that. Just hold the gun and lock your wrist so the gun's not moving around, okay? With your support hand, we want to make contact with the frame of the gun and clamp my hand down onto the frame. I'm not focused on holding my fingers hard. I'm focused on the frame so that the gun will not move around inside of my hand. If we see this, the trigger guard popping off your hand, like that is a big problem. That means the gun's moving around, okay? So that is bad. Now, while you're doing this, you should be paying attention to, you know, the core principles of like how you're holding the gun. It should be consistent, it should be predictable, all right, and it should be durable. All right, so consistent means I hold it the same way every time, okay? If I do that, the gun's gonna behave in a predictable fashion. It's gonna do the same stuff every time. I won't feel like I'm fighting some battle. And then as long as my grip is durable, that means it's not changing and it can survive me shooting a lot of rounds, okay? Typically what happens is, as people shoot more and more, their firing hand clamps down and or their support hand just kind of leaves the exercise. Then this changes the way the gun behaves, and then a person starts like reacting to that. So they're not gonna be consistent if they're doing that. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. I'll make a couple examples here. Go ahead and watch my hands as I do this. What happened there? Yeah, so what you saw, and my support hand just loosened up more. I saw the sight went up, and then I'd like start pushing it down, and it was like first shot, second shot, first shot, second shot, first, second. Okay? That's gonna be I mean, it's exaggerated, but that sort of thing is gonna be pretty common, that my grip changed while I was shooting, then I start compensating by pushing down on the gun. This is not what you want to do. Obviously, if I hold the gun the same way, I'm going to get the same outcome. I'll make another example for you here. I'm going to focus on holding the gun as hard as I can and mitigating the recoil as much as I can. How much muscle tension does it look like I'm using here?
A lot.
A lot? All right. All right. Now you saw the gun rose some amount in recoil, whatever that was. Now, what I just did is not the way we want you to shoot. Okay, you can see all the muscle I'm using. That'll make everything else that you have to do harder. Right, so if you're tracking a moving target, transitioning to another target, you're moving into position, you're gonna shoot a target, all of that becomes more difficult if your body's super tense like that. Okay, instead, hold the gun with your hands and your forearms, like I said, and I'm not gonna focus on stopping the pistol from rising up in recoil. I'm just gonna focus on it behaving consistently and predictably. Now watch how much it rises in recoil now. How many of you, maybe a little bit more rise, right? A little bit more, not much. You just see it didn't behave that much differently, okay? All of that muscle that I'm putting into it, that is silly. It's like, if you look at it like that, it's like, that's not helpful, right? So a lot of you, the focus here will be on what you're not doing. Just like, you don't need to clamp, like use tons of muscle or try to feel like you're fighting with the gun. You will find that to be counterproductive. Instead, again, like I said, focus, consistent grip, The gun behaves predictably. You're not trying to force it down out of recoil. You just look at a small spot and so on. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. One other thing to pay attention to here, for us, like what we're assessing is what you get out of this drill. It's not, we're not going to come over like, hey, you shot C's and D's, dummy, like that's bad. Instead, the question from us will be like, hey, did you see that happen? Did you feel that? Like, and if you're like, yep, like the second pair I fired, I pushed down into it, you know, whatever, that means, yeah, you're keyed into what's happening. If you're just like, no, I don't know what happened, that's okay too. We're going to shoot a lot of rounds, and we want you to keep shooting aggressively so you can figure out what's happening, right? It's not going to be, hey, back off and shoot more A's. That's not going to be our attitude. Sound good? All right. Just everybody grab a target. We'll get to it. Okay, let's talk about our assessment of the targets. This will be the pattern the whole time for 2 days. Is we're going to shoot a bunch of rounds on a drill, shoot it kind of the same way, same order, and then we're looking at the big picture. This group in the center, what do you think? That looks good, right? Okay, so the question is, what's causing this most likely? Is this the first or second shot that dude fired? Second. And what'd he do? Yeah, push down. What about these up here?
Just breaking before.
Shot too early doesn't count, but like, we'll add aiming references in a second, but what's happening is probably he's not staring at a spot, and instead his eyes are catching the sight, and you hit where you look, right? So if your red dot's sitting here bouncing and that catches your attention, then shots go up into that, all right? So it's like, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna look at the target, assess the pattern, be like, yep, this is probably what's happening. Then we're gonna keep shooting really aggressively, and you're gonna have that in your mind, like, yeah, that's probably what I'm doing. Then you try to see it happen, and then you try to build on it and improve. Right? Does that work for everybody? This will be how we do it, how we roll the whole time. Is aggressive shooting, look at what's wrong, fix the problem at speed, try to understand what's going on. All right, what's up? Patch all these up. Okay, I've added black spots onto the target. Now, what we're going to ask you to do is you drive your attention to a small spot on a target. Doesn't really matter how far away it is. You're always going to look small on the target. And you want to have the intent to put bullets on that spot. Let me make an example for you. Okay. Looking at the pattern on the target, what am I doing wrong?
Not focusing on the box.
What do you think I'm looking at?
Dot.
Exactly. So, if this is you, if you have shots going up high, quite likely what's going on is you're just staring at your sight and you're shooting, and you can tell I'm not putting input into the gun, not like lateral input, right? I'm just looking at that spot. It was like, I'll go boom, boom, and shoot. And it's like, yeah, I didn't move the gun. I didn't push it down. It should be good. Then you look down, it's like, oh no, they're going up high, all right? So adding in these aiming references, you're gonna have them the whole morning. Like, these are gonna really help you. Like, you know, it gives you a spot to look at, you know, and you wanna drive bullets onto it, and you know, it's gonna make everybody shoot better. Also, I want you to think like it gives you a spot that you can track how your sight moves against that spot. So it makes it really easy, I think, to understand what's going on. So for example, if you see your sight go up and then down and then up and then down left, that's gonna be like, oh, okay, I think I pushed that one, you know, to the left. Giving you that reference on the target makes life a lot easier, I think. Now, there's a difference here between focus and awareness, because we're asking you to focus on the spot, but we still need you to be aware of your sight, right? So a good example, I think will resonate with most of you. When you're out at dinner with your wife, she's sitting across from you, right? So that's got my focus, right? But then there's some chick in the background, yoga pants and the big fake hoodies, like Scottsdale chick, like the long blonde hair, the whole deal. Your focus is here. Your awareness is there, right? But you're definitely aware of what's happening. If your eye drifts off and the focus changes, what's your wife and you just gonna turn around? And now it's game on, right? And the same thing will happen with your shooting. Like, you need to be aware of how the sight's moving and be able to articulate it. As soon as you start looking at that, that's where your bullets go, and it's like, done. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's give it another try, guys. Step back. Matt, yeah, that's a good spot for Matt. Matt should be there. All right. We're going to talk about returning the gun and how much input that takes. We'll do a quick little exercise. It's just one shot, return the gun. It's not a performance thing. We don't give a shit where the bullets go, really. We just want you to understand how the gun's behaving. Exercise is pretty simple. I'm going to look at a spot on the target. Every time I get a beep, I fire the shot, and then I return the gun to that black spot. All right? Now, I'll do it a few different ways, and just watch how the gun behaves, and then we'll talk about it. So again, watch the muzzle of the gun, don't watch the target. All right. Okay, as you can see, I did that a few different ways. Now, what did you see with how the gun behaved? You should have seen it change a few times.
Too low and then too high.
Yeah, so initially I started doing it's like, boom, the gun would come back and return. Kind of, I would say immediately. Now that to me, that's what you want. So I fire the gun, as soon as the gun cycles and comes back, like I should see the dot wiggling around that black spot. So it's like, boom, it's right back for me. Then, right after that, then I started like, all right, I'm gonna drive it down really aggressively, and you saw the gun get pushed down. All right, here's a question for you. Should I see my dot go below that black spot? No, I mean, it's like, if I do that, you just have to accept, like, if you see that sight go below your intended point aim, like, you did that. Like, you pushed it down. After that, then, a lot of people will do the next thing I did, which is shoot and just don't put input into the gun. Like, shoot, let it go up, and then return it really slow. It's like, that's going to be a no-go. Like, that's not realistic. That's not the way you need to shoot the gun. And then I did it correctly again at the end. What the takeaway for most of you is going to be doing this is how little energy it takes to return the gun. And it makes sense if you think about it. If I shoot a shot, the gun goes up, how much energy does it take to return my Glock like this?
Almost none.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know in like kilojoule of newtons or whatever the hell, but it's not a big number, whatever it is. It's almost nothing. Right, so it's not much energy to return it. If you feel like you're fighting a battle with this thing, you are almost certainly doing way too much. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, let's get the brown group up here. Okay, we're gonna go back to the doubles at this distance at I don't know, roughly 15 yards. I think all of you are probably noticing that your sight leaves the target and comes back to it when you're shooting, right? I mean, the same thing with your rifle. We're going to back up to a point where you perceive your sight leaving the target. Most people, they see that happening, they just don't like it, and they change behavior. Okay, and you got to understand, like if I'm shooting the targets at 5 yards, the dot's going to move like this. If it's at 30 yards, the dot's going to move the same way. Like nothing really changed. It's just the target is now smaller than the movement of the sight. Understand, if you keep fixated on that spot on the target, the sight will come back to where you're looking. If you see the sight leaving the target, what most people want to do is they want to add input to push it down faster. Does that sound like something we want you to do? No, it's not going to be good. All right, so just be aware of that when we go back to rapid fire doubles. Nothing changes. Stare at the black spot, the sight will come back.
So just like with pistol, we're going to use the doubles drill, predictive shooting, to kind of stress or pressure test fundamentals with the rifle, right? Primarily what we're looking at is connection to the rifle and the visual piece. It's the same cues that we're paying attention to with doubles, right? For me, I will value like connection to the rifle as a foundational skill kind of above almost everything else, right? Because in order for me to shoot this rifle very, very aggressively, I've got to maintain good control of it, right? We're gonna focus on the same principles, consistency. This time, instead of grip, kind of referring to it as the mount, how I mount and connect to the rifle. We want it to be consistent. It's the same pressure every time. I want it to be stable, where the pressure doesn't change while I'm shooting, and it needs to be durable, right? Once I set on this gun, on kind of for shooting drills, shooter ready, stand by, I'll connect to the rifle immediately, and that pressure stays consistent throughout the engagement. All right, that's something that is one training scar on the range that will pay dividends for you down the road, right? right? Especially if you use a rifle for your job or anything like that, shooting competitions or anything that you're doing. Connection to the rifle early, being ready to shoot as soon as possible is always going to play to your favor. I can just talk about how I connect to the rifle. For me, just like with a pistol, my support hand, my left hand, is doing the lion's share of the work. All right, I like to connect to the rifle, or excuse me, hand position, right? The same place I have my pistol, same arm bend, everything. It's nice and comfortable. I do the, it looks the exact same with my rifle. Right now, how I assess the pressure, because my left hand is doing virtually all of the work. It's not in my hand with how hard I hold the forend, right? That doesn't really do anything in terms of control. And I'm also not assessing it by what I feel like in my bicep. As we shoot more and more throughout the day, you understand you're gonna get tired, right? And what you perceive, how much force you're pulling in with your arm, is gonna change as you get tired. So how I like to assess the pressure is what I feel with the buttstock against my shoulder, right? That's where all the conscious thought is, right? What we'll see happening, just like with the pistol, as we get a few good reps, the left hand just kind of leaves the exercise, right? And stops doing really any work. Same thing with the pistol. My firing hand is just kind of it's holding the pistol grip firm, but there's not a lot of force in it. What we'll see in terms of dot tracking, if I pull the gun way back like this, what do we think we're gonna see with how the dot moves? Right, it's gonna go higher, right? Because there's nothing here really controlling it. So as this hand relaxes, typically what you see is more dot movement with the rifle. Just like with the pistol, we can shoot the rifle way more aggressive than the pistol, but as that dot starts moving, what does everything in our head tell us to do? Put more into it. Also stare at the dot, right? As it starts moving more and more, you disconnect from the target and you'll stare at that dot, and it becomes like a self-licking ice cream cone. It's the first problem. It compounds on itself. Before you know it, there's no more ice cream in the cone and you have no idea why. All right, so this is what we're trying to do with this drill. I like doubles with the rifle as a training strategy. It is by no means an engagement like sequence. This is not how I would use this rifle for my work if you're law enforcement. This is what we're using to actually pressure test foundational skills, connection to the rifle, and what we're doing visually. All right, make a quick demo. Again, for this, when we're shooting this at 10, I'm not really concerned of the holdover. I'm using the aiming reference the same way I did for the pistol, present the dot to it, and then I'm paying attention to how that dot is moving against that aiming reference. Playing with the pressures, right? How much force I'm putting in with my support hand, and tying all the conscious thought to the connection to the rifle. Notice is a very consistent dot tracking pattern. If I do my part, I do everything correct, that dot barely leaves that reference mark at 10. One thing that's going to pay dividends on that, where guys have to start paying attention to, is what's happening below your waist, right? If I watch my upper body, if I maintain really weak legs with not a lot of input into them, watch what that does to my upper body. Happening there? I'm getting rocked back with every shot, right? What does that do in terms of how the dot behaves? The dot starts, it can still be consistent, but what we'll see is it's moving on the target up, up, and up. If I were to stack a third, fourth, fifth round behind that, that dot just goes up the target. If I'm still target focused and I'm paying attention to where the hits are going, I have to do more active aiming in terms of pushing that dot back down. Just like what we found out with the pistol, input into this gun while I'm shooting it is never gonna work out in your favor. There used to be an idea that you could drive the dot back to the center of the target. What what happens is as that dot lifts and you force it down, it never stops back on the intended point of aim. You typically go past, right? Lift it up again, it goes to a different spot, and it starts this really weird and aggressive kind of infinity symbol on the target where you're just painting the entire target, right? That type of dot movement causes a number of problems. You'll stare at it, at the dot, you'll lose awareness of the target or where the dot is on the target, and the whole target just starts to get shot up. All right?
I want to show you guys some bad examples too.
Yep.
It's my favorite. All right.
You're a real natural, Ben.
So watch the way I manage the rifle, and you should be able to tell me what I'm doing wrong. All right, so as we can see, first shot here, second shot up there. What's going on? Watching the dot? Yeah, I'm staring at the dot. Now, make the other common example of what's going on here. Okay, now we can see the hits way down low on the target. Yeah, you saw me. I was like torquing the rifle down with that support side. That's what Matt's talking about. Most people, most dudes are going to vacillate between that. They recognize the dot goes up higher than they intend, or it's like it's getting away from them. They're like, shit. Then they start pulling the gun down with the support hand, and away we go. You get the, Matt calls it the right-handed ribbon. I call it the seatbelt pattern. We've got some hit center, some up and away, and some that we pulled down. That'll be the common deal.
Yeah, we talk about control of the rifle. It's most people will conceptualize that more force is going to be better, right? It doesn't work out that way, right? I will tell you, for me, what my left hand is doing is not even remotely close to how hard I could hold the rifle, right? Above everything else, I value consistency of the mount while you're shooting. That's what's gonna pay dividends as we start going back 30, 40, 50 yards shooting this pace, right? Consistency, if I connect to the gun the same way every time and that pressure does not change, what I get with that is a very consistent dot tracking pattern, right? And with what we can do with the rifle in terms of performance, we want that above everything else. As soon as that falls apart, right, the dot does something different in recoil, draws your eye to it, right, and you maintain connection to the dot, disconnect from the target, and the hits go in everywhere. All right, think about when you guys zero, what distance do you guys zero your rifles at? Huh?
50.
50. What do you look at when you zero it? You lay down to zero, what are you staring at? The dot. 100%. Everybody does. What should you be staring at? The target, right? So as we go back to distances that become closer and closer to your zero distance, what do you think you're programmed to do?
Dot focus.
Dot focus 100%, right? This, we're trying to get you to accept appropriate levels of information with what the sight is telling you and not kind of constantly questing for more and more information. When you do this correctly, you maintain target focus, you shoot this string, the connection doesn't change. What you should feel mentally exhausted, right? Because it's maintaining focus and awareness, that's one piece of it. But what you'll feel like too is that you almost feel like you're not aiming enough, right, to get the result. We want to maintain hard target focus, and our awareness of the dot is what changes, right, as we go back. Does that make sense?
Matt, with your support hand, did you say you don't pull as hard as you possibly can?
It's nowhere remote as hard. It's not even close to how hard I pull in, right? What it's still just a 22 caliber rifle, right? It doesn't take a lot to control it, right? In terms of pressure, I don't know what percentage it is. What I'm constantly evaluating is the pressure that I feel based off historical information for me shooting this rifle a bunch. I'm assessing it always in my shoulder. And if I feel that loosen up, right, I gotta fix that on the fly. Does that make sense?
You'll feel like somebody's like flicking you in the shoulder like this, and that's how you know the rifle's coming off your shoulder. And
Yep.
the correction is pull in more, not clamp down harder, but pull in a little more.
So everybody come over to this side. We'll show you some common errors with that. So we talk about connecting to the rifle early in the drill, right? On standby. You're gonna get shooters ready, standby. On standby, connect to that rifle immediately. Because once we get into talking about how we present the gun, we want to be connected to it. It's going to calm the presentation down significantly. What we see a lot of is guys are way too loose, and watch how the gun moves while I'm shooting it. How's that look in my shoulder? You see the gun moving, and it's touching my body with every shot, right? That's very common. You see guys that are nice and stable, good base, good platform, but as they shoot, the gun is moving. What that translates to is typically, it can be a consistent dot tracking pattern, but it's moving all over the target. For me, it comes up to the right to 1 o'clock and drops way down to like 7. And I just see this line, right? We've got to fix that with connection. All right, so as we shoot this, all the conscious thought needs to be on how you're connected to the rifle in terms of pressure, and if we're not getting the result we want, we play with how much force we're putting into the gun. Does that make sense? All right, let's line up at 10. We're just gonna shoot this a little bit at 10 to get familiar with it, and we'll go back.
Shot.
So come down here, guys, real quick. So one of the things we have to look at is pay attention to how our hits are trending on the targets, right? We see this, Ben calls it the seatbelt. To me, this is the right-handed ribbon, right? Classic. We see a couple airs where we're pulling the gun down past our point of aim. Very common, right? The dot starts on the aiming reference. It lifts up to 1 o'clock. Everything in you is like, hey, let me help it get back. It's going to make me shoot faster. And you end up dragging shots low. So we get like 1 in, 1 out. Here to the right, what's causing the rounds to track high? Watching the dot, right? That's a huge issue with shooting the rifle. As we start shooting more and more aggressively, the tendency to stare at that dot, right? We become dot focused rather than just being aware of the dot, and it tracks high.
So our Scottsdale yoga pants chick, now the yoga pants are red. Get it? Yeah, it's hard to.
Just like if you look at her, what happens with your wife? Nothing good, right? Same thing. There's very few good things that are going to come from staring at that dot. All right. When we consider the group size, right, I think you always have to balance the capability of the weapon system against your group, not what you can do. Right? If we were to shoot a group at 10, what would it look like? Tight, right? So we need to kind of pay attention to that, right? We're not really outcome-based focused. I don't care that you're making mistakes. What I care about is that you can kind of correlate cause and effect to what caused that mistake, right? We shouldn't come up, as we go back 20, 30, 40, we're not going to be able to see where the impacts are. We're going to have to assess what's happening while we're shooting. The objective assessment of what the sights are doing while it's happening needs to be the goal, right? You guys have all heard of like shot calling, right? I'm not a big fan of shot calling. I get it's a skill to do, but what if you call a bad shot? What can you do about it?
You tell everybody, like, no, I called it. It's like,
yeah.
Okay, dude, you fucking called it. Like,
right. So when we get into reactive shooting, the shot calling stuff with the rifle, I think especially for guys that carry rifles for a living, it's just of almost no value, right? I want to fix foundational skills where I'm doing all the work on calling the shot before I start shooting.
Yeah, there's one other thing to point out. It's as we back up, like Matt said, we're not going to see what the rules are. If you walk down here and you like didn't perceive like what you see, so for example, if there's a bunch of stuff up high or something and you didn't perceive it from back further, that's a big indicator that you're staring at your sight. Why? Because if you look at the sight, you get a really good idea of that sight position, but then against it, you'll just see like red on brown. You're like, yeah, it looks good. It's on brown, but the brown's blurry, right? So you don't know exactly where it's at. And then you walk down here like, oh, it's like, it's not what I thought. So that's a big indicator of sight focus, which we don't want.
Yeah, if we maintain target focus, you maintain the ability to track where the dot is on the target while it's happening, right? You'll call it like that was low and left. And typically what guys will perceive as a mistake, they'll perceive it to be much worse than it actually is. You'll feel like you're dragging them into the delta or dragging them way down low, and you come up and they're just firmly sitting in the Charlie, right? But that's the cue that we're doing our part in terms of target focus correctly.
Matt, I have more autistic mount questions if I could.
Yep.
So feet, so the feet be both facing the target, I guess is part of it that I wanted to talk about. And then like what you were showing me, grabbing the rail like partway down compared to further towards the muzzle. Because I feel like conventional wisdom is if you grab more towards the business end, you have more like control over what's happening, if I'm making sense.
Yep. So there is an idea. So guys, kind of split a little bit. I'm going to point rifle up range. It's empty. So
this on YouTube, Matt's gonna be awesome.
Matt
is being very unsafe right now, internet.
There is an idea that if I will get more control if I hold the gun farther out, right? But now what does that do in terms of my arm and elbow position?
Limits your mobility.
It's going to limit mobility, right? I'm inducing unnecessary tension, right? Where that is just going to kind of crush me as I start going target to target, or if I'm moving, trying to shoot on the move. But what more importantly, if I get that elbow way out and now I apply force into the gun, watch what happens to the barrel. Right? Which direction does it go? It's going to go in the direction of your elbow. If you do anything in terms of combatives, you realize, where does all your power reside? Hips, core, in the middle, right? So I want to keep all the force that I put into this gun as close to the midline as possible, right? I can't do anything about where I connect to the rifle. I have it very deep in my shoulder laterally because I wear a plate carrier for a living. So I want my connection to the rifle on the range when I'm not wearing the plate carrier to be the same as when I'm wearing the plate carrier. But I can do something about how I apply force to the gun. To me, having the elbow very neutral, right? And once I connect to it, I'm pulling more back. So as I put max force into this gun, watch the end of the muzzle. Where's it go? It's coming straight back, right? Now if I keep my elbow out, where does it go?
Towards the elbow.
Pulling it towards the elbow, right? So how we're kind of positions ourselves behind the rifle from a mechanic standpoint makes a difference.
Yeah. I think of that like, I try to be neutral and consistent, but I'm like, nobody's like 100% consistent all the time, right? The forces change. So as you angle your elbow down, that's like that measure keeps you from moving the rifle around. A similar concept with your pistol is, if you look at my thumbs here, you'll see my thumbs are floating off the side of the gun. I'm not trying to do shit with my thumbs. A lot of dudes put this pressure into the side of the pistol like this because they're like, ooh, I'll put in more pressure and that gives me more control, right? But if that pressure is changing, you can see it moves the gun around. So I just like, no, I'm just gonna let my thumbs float off the side so the pressure's neutral and I don't influence the gun. It's the same sort of idea, right? Like, what matters to us is consistency, predictability. It's not about like the max control threshold. That's not really the important thing.
Yeah. Now, in terms of what my feet are doing, I don't subscribe to, years ago it was feet towards the target, right? Plate towards the threat. But really quickly, guys understood there can be threats everywhere, right? And the plate covers an insignificant amount of my body anyway. I can get shot here, I can get shot on the side of the plate. So above everything else, I want to be in a position that's comfortable for me, right? It allows me to maintain good control of the rifle and also gives me the ability to explode out of that position if I need to. And what I find works good for me, I shoot a relatively bladed rifle stance. I drop my foot pretty far behind. My toes are generally pointed in the same direction, but they're not pointed towards the target. All right, I'll square my hips up to what I'm shooting, but when I connect to the rifle, I bend my legs and load my legs very, very consistently and evenly. Now, if I need more control on the rifle, how I conceptualize that is I'm going to flex my my front quad just a little bit and kind of put more force into that lead leg. Now, I don't want to get into a stance where I'm driving this knee to the target. I don't think that's going to be very comfortable, and then this one stops doing anything. I'm more times than not, I'm just putting a little flex in that leg, and it makes my upper body feel like I'm leaning into the rifle a little bit. Another way that I'll get control without applying input into the gun is if I'm taking farther shots, or I know, hey, I'm about to shoot this really aggressively at 40 and I want more control, I don't pull the gun back in harder. For me, I'll take my left elbow and just rotate it down slightly. What that does is it firms up the connection to it without me having to put an inconsistent input into it that I typically don't use. What we'll find out is that the force we put into the gun is probably a lot less than what you conceptualize, right? It doesn't take a lot to control this, especially if I'm 6 foot, 240 pounds. I don't need to hold this gun that steady, right? For it to behave very consistently. And plus, what you'll do, if I'm really wrenching on it, what does that do over time as we're training? Yeah, you're gonna be smoked, right? And the more tired you get, the more inconsistent everything's gonna become in terms of connection to the rifle. Does that make sense?
Does stock length, like where you have it positioned at, does that tie into connection also, do you feel? Or is it like based on your long neck, short neck, your build, like that kind of a deal?
Yeah, your build plays a lot into it, right? Obviously smaller people, right, to get their hands positioned correctly on the rifle, stock length plays into that. I think for most guys, you know, shooting it all the way out or maybe one position in is going to be about right. What you want to avoid, right, is guys that like to shoot it really close, right? And now I'm completely jammed up on the gun, right? This is a 16-inch overall length gun. There's no need for me to hold it like it's a sub gun, right? Some different smaller rifles that have fixed buttstocks, yeah, you're gonna have to deal with shooting it, you know, where you're kind of jammed up on it. But do I look more comfortable shooting like this or with it out like this? Extended, right? To me, it feels much more comfortable. My support hand is in the exact same position as when I shoot a pistol. So there's a commonality of systems there, of kind of principles that I'm reinforcing. When I'm shooting pistol, it translates over to rifle, right? And for me, that works very well. Makes sense? Any other questions? All right, let's rehab the targets. We'll jam up bags and then meet up at the 20. A little exercise to kind of stress, you know, focus versus awareness, so you can kind of see what's happening in real time. What I'm going to ask you guys to do is we'll line up on the 20-yard line, and I want everyone to mount the rifle, get a good solid connection to the rifle, and maintain a good sight picture over the aiming reference, right? I want you to hold the dot very, very steady over that aiming reference, and I want you to put both eyes on the dot. I want you to focus on it, you know, 100% focus on that dot and try to hold it on the aiming reference. Make sense? The only thing I'll ask, once we connect to the rifles and the dot comes up, don't put them down, right? Just maintain that hard dot focused and hold it very steady on the aiming reference, okay?
It'll be about 60 seconds, which you'll be probably suffering by the end of it. That's a long time.
All right, so good solid connection, like we're gonna shoot very aggressively, hard dot focused, and hold it very steady over the aiming reference, all right? Focused. Put both eyes in that too. Hold it very steady on the aiming reference. It's imperative that we keep it very stable and we stare at that dot. We got to keep the guns up. Stay connected to them. All right, we've been at it now about 15 seconds. What you should see is they're starting to become more and more wobble where it's almost impossible to hold that on that aiming reference. But you guys have to. Make the corrections, make the adjustment, hold the gun nice and still. Hard dot focus. We see now that dot is moving all around that aiming reference. All I want you to do now is put your vision out onto the target and maintain a very hard target focus. Assess, what did that do to the dot?
Calmed it way down.
All right, relax. So you see how perception should be for everybody that the dot, the movement of the dot calmed down. Did the dot calm down? Did it stop moving? It didn't. That wobble is still there, but how we perceive that wobble is important when we start shooting aggressively, right? If we stare at the dot, no matter whether you're doing it consciously or subconsciously, you're putting input into the gun based off what the dot's doing, even in normal recoil, right? It lifts, you stare at it, you're going to try to help it back down, right? In terms of the way the rifle's gonna work, right? Just like a pistol, when I shoot this and the round leaves the barrel, it comes out of lockup, bolt carrier group goes back into the buffer tube, the gun lifts. How much force does it take to return it? Yeah, it's built into the system, right? So as the bolt comes home, the gun levels, right? Anything outside of it returning, we have to understand that we're doing that. It's input that we're putting into the gun, and that's what we're trying to just calm down. If I'm consistent with how I hold the gun, right, that's step one. Step two is don't put extra input into the gun, right? Don't change the pressure in your support hand or your firing hand while you're shooting, right? Which that's basically the easiest explanation what we're doing when we're trying to drive the dot down, right? If we're not connected to it, you know, kind of before the drill, and I come up really loose, this is common. Watch how the pressure is when I mount the gun, right? What's that doing to the end of the barrel, right? It's bouncing, right? Because I'm nice and loose, and then when I put it up, I'm trying to do everything at once. What typically happens is you pull back with your firing hand and your support hand, right? And that connection is way more than what's needed, and it creates dot tracking patterns where the dot might lift less, but it always drops back down lower than the point of aim. All right, does that make sense? We're gonna shoot doubles, the same doubles that we shot at 10, we're gonna shoot it at 20. What's the pace we're gonna ask you to shoot? Same pace, right? As fast as you can pull the trigger, right? Again, this is not an engagement strategy at all. We're using this as a training tool to fix very basic foundational skills, right? What we find is if we can develop those things and make them perfect or near perfect, connection, and we can tighten the vision up a little bit, that solves about 90% of the problems with performance-based shooting. Okay? All right. Let's get the brown guys that fall in love with the process, right? Like getting better and practicing, making mistakes, like that spawns growth. If you just focus on outcome-based training for like military and law enforcement, guys are concerned about the size of their group when they leave the range.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you should leave the range wanting to quit shooting, then you know that was a valuable training session.
What about trinkets, patches, special secret handshakes?
Not swinging at that one.
The guy who shoots the best on CQB warm-up tomorrow is actually going to get Matt's hat off his head. Either that, or you get the strip club hat off my head. The choice is yours.
All right, we're gonna do.
Yoga pants, huh? That hat coming back?
Yeah, well, yeah.
We're gonna do a real quick kind of awareness drill to play with different pressures. Hopefully, while we're training this and we're going back, that you guys are exploring different inputs into the gun, right? If everything's clicking, right, then we're just refining, right? We're trying to make it as consistent as possible, but I think it's good for guys to understand like what the left hand actually should be doing, all right? So we're gonna shoot this like this. I'll shoot 2 strings. The first iteration is my left hand is going to do nothing, right? It's just gonna be sitting there on the gun, right? With very, very weak connection. And the group is what the group is. Now the next string, I'm gonna shoot 2 where I'm going to do 100% of force with my left hand, right? Basically everything I've got in terms of connection. Come down and look at them. So here's the group. where I'm putting maximum force into it, right? Here's the group where my hand's doing nothing. What's the difference? Which one's better? Right.
Less effort.
The one thing I did that's consistent across both of them is I put no extra input into the gun. So I think this is important for guys to conceptualize like how we have to connect to it. We're saying, hey, this is the main, this hand's doing all of the work, right? But what level of work is it doing, right? We're stressing consistency of connection, and how I assess it is still back in the shoulder, but we'll shoot this a couple times to let guys see that the force might not be what you think it is, right? That you have to put into the gun, right? And it's finding that medium, right? Like what it's gonna take for you is gonna be different than you. It's gonna be different than you, right? And this is where the inductive learning kind of approach that we're taking is we've got to shoot enough rounds to experience these things in real time. And then we should be constantly making adjustments. And then once we get to where we're getting the result we want, you know, we're there on accountability, control, performance. We're operating really high frequency on all three of those things. Then we start fixing little nuanced issues, right? Like what we're doing visually, what kind of tweaking stance, right? But above everything else, consistent pressure to the gun, consistency, and the right pressure is what you've got to find. Make sense? All right, let's shoot this real quick at 10. More force, it doesn't equal more stability. It won't equal a better outcome, right? It's the right amount of input into the gun in terms of connection is what we're looking at.
Right.
All right.
Also, same with the pistol. It's not about like making it do less. It's about consistency and predictability, not so much like how high you perceive the dot travels in recoil. That's not what we're too worried about.
Yeah. Let's tape these up and we'll switch, let the other group shoot. So we're gonna continue on back at 30. What do you guys think are gonna be some of the big issues back at 30, 40, and beyond?
Dot focus.
Dot focus is the biggest one, right? Why is that, do you think?
I feel like you need it more.
Yeah, I guess it's proportionally bigger to your target now.
Yeah, proportionally bigger, right? I think as we get closer to our actual zero distance, a lot of guys are programmed that that level of information is what you want, right? That focusing on the dot is going to somehow translate to being more precise, right? It absolutely won't. In terms of dot movement, what's the perception going to be? More. Is it moving more though? It's not. That's what we have to internalize. The gun is moving the same, right? So it requires the same amount of input that we were given up there. What's going to happen is if we become dot focused, it creates issues, right? We're staring at the rounds go up high. At this distance, if we become hyper aware of the dot, that can create problems as well, right? Regardless of us being target focused. I think back at 30 is the distance where it now becomes very, very difficult to look to a very small part of the target. I think for me, back at this distance, what I'm looking to is about a little bit smaller than palm size, right? And to me, that's a win, right? So target focused at that small spot is gonna pay dividends. Back here too, what we're doing below the waist is how we're gonna get the most performance out of the gun, all right? Maintaining a lot of that upper body recoil management with getting pushed back, right? Because even getting pushed back a little bit, what does that do to the dot? Right, so we can still maintain target focus. We can be doing everything correct and still see rounds tracking high, right? The way that we'll assess that, if you're like, nope, I was target focused, those felt good, I see them going high, then we've got to look to a mechanics issue and fix that, right? And becoming more and more aware of what we're experiencing shooting this way, that's the goal back at these farther yard lines. Make sense?
At what distance is it okay to back off on the pacing, or is it always maximum aggression, looking for those 11s?
Yep. So for this as a training tool, we're shooting the same pace, right? We're pressure testing connection to the rifle and our ability to be visually precise. That's what we're stressing out. If we slow down, we just made the drill easier, right? We can actually slow down to a point once we get past kind of 3-0 splits. Now we're not using predictive shooting as the training strategy that we want. We're training something different, right? where we're training more reactive, and we'll get into that a little bit later. All right, but the pace we want to shoot is still about as fast as we pull the trigger, right? You figure there's a lot of different levels. Do you guys all train with timers typically? So guys can conceptualize what 0.2 of a second is, right? Fast predictive pace is under 0.2, right? 2.5 and 2.6 in my mind is still predictive, but it starts to get very, very close to reactive shooting, right? So we still want to stay, you know, about that 0.2 pace as fast as we can pull the trigger. Again, it's not an engagement strategy at all, right? We're using this as a training tool to force mistakes to happen, right? What you get from this as well is you'll become very, very comfortable shooting at this pace, right? The goal should be you get comfortable doing things most people aren't comfortable doing, right? That's a huge like level up in terms of training progression, right? And then what do you think happens if we back off ever so slightly? Yeah, we introduce accountability, control, and we're still maintaining very high levels of performance. For guys that carry guns for a living, right, I believe this is how you have to train. We want the way that we're shooting to be harder and more difficult than what an actual shooting would look like. Make sense? All right, let's go.
Stay inside the front seat.
Yeah, no, you shoot out of the windshield.
The vehicle is your safety, right? The front seat's your safety.
Stop all the bullets.
Hide behind the steering wheel.
Can we have a serious class for half the day?
The next half. We're not in that.
It was partially my fault.
So somebody asked a question about rifle setup, right? To me, rifle setup is a completely personal thing, right? But a lot of guys conceptualize like something's gonna be good, where I think if the more you use this gun, in reality, the more you see that having a lot of shit on your rifle isn't necessarily better, right? For pulling back in, guys that have vertical grips that are short, where you're not actually on the gripper, you're using it as like a fulcrum point. Sometimes, from my experience, what I'll get is a twisting motion when I start to pull back with the gun. The places I've worked, you had the ability to have anything on your rifle that you wanted, right? There's just, go to the arms room, you can get whatever they want. Buckets of this shit, angled grips, vertical ones, with lights, without lights, right? Anything. And guys typically will explore it, you know, it takes about 2 years where they're running through everything. At the end of 2 years, most guys end up with a rifle that looks very similar to this. Very stripped down, right, with pressure pads in areas that they're comfortable with, right? The reason I like a very vanilla rifle on the bottom, if you think about shooting from a supported position, right? If I have a vertical grip and now I'm shooting like across the hood of a car, right? Would I rather have this entire thing braced on the car or just a 1-inch square braced, right? And unless they work really well on VTAC barriers and things like that, right? Semi two-dimensional pieces of plywood, but in reality, where does a supported position like that exist out in the real world? Nowhere, right? Right? And that's where I think a lot of people don't understand. In my experience, we've used that VTAC barrier for one thing and one thing only, and it wasn't to learn how to shoot from a supported position. It was confined space maneuvering of the rifle, right? You limit the amount of distance a guy can be behind it, and now you're working a gun handling skill of getting really comfortable moving the rifle around you and not you around the rifle, right? That's what, in my opinion, that barrier is for. As you start shooting fronts of cars, bumpers, three-dimensional barriers like the barrels, you start to see the limitation of all those hand stops. And in reality, unless you have some sort of like defect where injury or something where your wrist won't move correctly, what do those hand stops really do?
Catch on stuff.
They catch on stuff, but why is it on there?
Pull more tension in.
Pull more tension in is the idea, but do we see that we need a lot of tension on the rifle?
Yeah, you don't.
You don't. And how many times who's got a rifle with a hand stop? Let me see yours. So how many times have you all right, have you experienced this where I'm shooting, everything's good. I'm gonna do a manipulation, I'm gonna reload, and then you come back out to here. Right? How many times have you experienced that? That was the #1 reason for me, like, I'm taking this shit off my gun. Right? Because it's an obstruction now, it's a reference point, but to come back here when I could normally come out to my gun and just slide out to the hand position, it stops it. So now what do I have in terms of consistency of the mount? I'm violating it myself because of my equipment, right? And I see it more times than not. Sling placements, right? When the sling's way out there, right? And guys will come up and they get tangled up in the sling, finding their hand position back up. So even though rifle setup is a very, very personal thing based off what you like, there's bona fide ways to set your gun up that in my mind are just better, right? The way that I'll find, like, sling attachment points closer to the center of the gun for me always work better, right? If you start going up over walls, jumping over shit, right? A rifle that hangs like this is my teeth like a lot better than a rifle that hangs like this. Does that make sense? Right? Especially if you fast rope or even going up over an obstacle, right? Where you've got a ledge up, this never works out. This to me is much, much more comfortable, right? And then you think of it in terms of when I have, if I were to move this back here, right? Now, to me, I feel it binding up in my neck, but now when I want to change position, say I want to run and reload, and I come to underarm assault, my sling, now I have to be concerned with how tight that sling is, right? If I move it to the rear of the pistol grip, I can run my sling nice and tight and still get manipulation, right? Which gives me more control if I'm doing any other like contingency task, right? The gun is just nice and stable.
Sorry, go ahead. Do you have any techniques with that to keep it out of the way of your firing hand? Because like it's kind of annoying where it's, you know, it could be in the way.
For me, it's tension, right? It's sling tension.
Okay.
So if my sling is way too loose, now it hangs and now it can get in the way of my firing hand. But if I have my sling at kind of a correct tension, it's not in the way. And what I get in terms of support, right? This is much more stable and still allows me to move however I want, right? To transition, it's all out of the way, right? And to me, it just makes for a better setup, right? How many guys fight it shooting 2 weapon systems, right? When you're transitioning to pistol, right? If it's uncomfortable, like I'm a big comfy kit type guy, right? If I put stuff on and it's not comfortable, I'm immediately trying to change it, right? I want to be as comfortable as I can when I'm having to wear all of this bullshit. Does that make sense? All right, let's keep going. Volume up on everything, right? So all the same cues exist. Feet, what's happening with our base is going to pay dividends back here. Being visually precise, staying target focused, and just letting the gun do its thing. Make sense? All right, let's go.
Oh, fight. We're shooting pistols, so we get to be close. Okay, so we just did a bunch of predictive shooting, doing doubles, the pistol with the rifle. Very useful. Now we're gonna slow things down and shoot reactively. So we're gonna have a high degree of accountability where it's like we're gonna see sight press, sight press, sight press. We'll do this with the pistol and the rifle, of course. I'll make a couple examples for you. I'm gonna look at my small aiming reference at the tone, gun comes up, and there will be 6 shots. That would be a no-go repetition for us. Why? Because the gun came down and you could see like the gun's at my eye target line, it's not moving. I'm not adjusting my aim at all. What should I be doing? Pressing the trigger, right? I wanted to say, no, sight press, like at the pace of my sights, that's what I want. Okay, let's try it again. All right, the result in terms of the hits on the target, is it a lot different? Why not? I don't know if Matt said it yet today, but do sight pictures tend to improve with time? No, they don't. I mean, it's just like, no, the sight's down there. It's like, what are you doing? Like, what are you waiting for? I mean, as soon as you see the sight flash down, we're going to react to that and pull the trigger. Now I'll make an example for you of probably the most common thing we're going to see. Watch my hand carefully here. What did it look like I was doing? Yeah, so all I did, I drew the gun, I connected to the red dot, visually stared at it, and then as the red dot went up in recoil, I was like, oh, I need to get the red dot down. I pushed it down, and then it turned into this thing where I'm looking at my spot, and I'm pushing the sight down. It was like boom, 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 trying to like ambush that black spot. As soon as I see the red dot flash down, I try to ambush it. And you can see, of course, we get the right-handed ribbon is the correct terminology. As shown, I mean, it's going to be something like this, and as you back up, of course, it just gets more and more extreme. The solution, look at the spot you want the gun to come to, allow the gun to return to your vision. Don't stare at the dot and try to torque the gun down. As we're training on this, we want to try to be aware of that and mitigate it, right? Focus on the spot on the target and let the sight come to you. Does that make sense to everybody? Just to be clear, for the accuracy expectations, I'm not expecting you to put everything in that black spot, but we're going to drive our attention to a small spot. And I mean, control-wise, you should be able to shoot, you know, pretty aggressive pace, like 1/4 of a second or 3/10 of a second between shots, and at least hold the A zone back to like 15 yards, 20 yards, something like that. That's very achievable with this. Should we give it a try? Holding our grip, yeah? All right, so from the holster is the question?
Yeah, just how you're marrying your support hand up to your firing hand.
All right, so first thing I do, go for the retention device. Really commonly, especially when you have a retention device to your feet, dudes want to do that, like clamp down with a firing hand. This is not good. I mean, in dry training especially, I'm really conscious of like, hey, just get my thumb up there and get on the gun so I'm sure the gun's coming out. That's really all I need to do. I don't want to push the gun coming up on the holster. I'm going to get my support hand over towards the gun, not where I'm going to flag myself, of course, but just over towards the gun. Now the key for me is I try to get on the frame of the gun. So just for my connection to the frame earlier. I think the key is you get started sooner, and I want to be done before the gun's at my eye target line so I can actually react to what I'm seeing. In my brain, I'm thinking about, hey, hold, crush, gun comes up, and then I'm like, yep, it's good. All right? Does that make sense to everybody? The key index points that I'm feeling for, it's the web of my hand high up in the back strap. If I feel that, like, doesn't matter what the rest of my hand's doing. When I feel this, especially right here, and I feel this, I'm like, yep, I'm good, and I'm gonna pull the gun from the holster, and then with my support hand, you see where I've got this tape? That's not for no reason. I'm gonna run that into the trigger guard, and then clamp down on the actual frame of the gun. So those are like the cues and index points that I feel for during my dry training so I can get on the same grip every time. Yes, sir.
So I have a consistent problem, which is low and left, and I was talking to Matt about it, and so I think when I'm trigger pulling, all of my digits are pulling that way. When you say you're crushing, I feel like when I crush, the way I'm doing it, it's wrong. I feel like I'm squeezing my hand like this, but it's still causing the same motion.
You're moving your support hand when you pull the trigger?
I mean, I try not to.
So that's you're violating like inconsistent pressure, right?
Yeah.
Stability. The hand's moving while you're shooting. So how we marry it up makes a difference, right? So, but everybody's hands are different.
Yeah.
Like I can't, all the same principles I do exactly the same as Ben. But when I mate the gun up, I'm gonna point my gun up this way. When I mate my support hand to the gun, right? What I find is if I'm like everyone's taught to lay that fat part in here on the grip, and then when I conceptualize like holding really tight, watch what happens to my master grip, right? As I put a lot of pressure into it. What am I doing with my firing hand? I'm pushing my firing hand fingers off of the gun.
Oh yeah.
By doing that, where that historically, sympathetically makes me squeeze harder with my hand.
Right.
So the way that I'm getting around that is the first touch point again under the trigger guard. I'm anchoring these fingers into my other part of my hand, that's where I'm assessing the pressure, right? And those are nice and steady. I do that very early in the process. So when I push out, now I'm pulling down on that master grip, which allows me to be more relaxed here and then feel a more stable grip, right?
I think I'm doing the first one. I think I'm pushing my firing hand off.
It sounds like it. I mean, if you're just thinking, I'm going to do more pressure with your support hand, it
That's
won't
what
fix everything.
I just keep saying, fucking squeeze harder.
You cannot left hand squeeze your way out of moving the gun with your firing hand when you pull the trigger. It doesn't work that way. So if I push my hands against each other hard, then I just momentarily increase pressure on one side. You can see I can always move it, always.
Yeah.
So it's like if you're shooting, like if you're pushing down low left, you're like, oh, more left hand. It's like, that will not fix it. You need to just hold the gun, like hold your right hand still and isolate your trigger finger.
So building the grip, right? The mechanics of building the grip is one part of this, right? You want to demo the fucked up grips?
The fucked up grips?
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at the fucked. How fucked up do you want it?
No. So we'll watch. So watch. Part of this is the grip. There's a mechanics thing, right? But in terms of stability, my grip doesn't have to be. That's one piece of the puzzle.
Oh yeah. I showed these guys this earlier, so I could.
Visually, what he's doing.
Again, I could draw the gun any way I want to, hold it any way I want. I can run him into a pretty small group with a totally fucked grip. I could even, pull the trigger with a. As long as you don't see my hand flexing.
Yeah.
That's the key. Is I'm not flexing this hand or trying to do anything, and I'm just trying to be consistent with whatever pressure my support hand has.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
That's going to make you accurate. How you marry up your grip, that is not going to be it.
Okay.
I mean, and probably like in your head, you think that you're being consistent or your grip is durable, and it's not. It's changing. Like as you stack more and more rounds, things are changing, and you're not aware of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
The A zone smaller. Right. What is going to change in terms of perception? Recoil, the dot transition, right? But what the sight vision used to look like at 5, it can't look that way at 10.
It's bigger.
Usually. No, it's just going to be more refinement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The dot's going to return. We're still working on shooting our vision, right? But we want to minimize the amount of over aiming. I don't need to see that stop stable dot all the time. Look at the part, and as soon as that dot touches the point of aim, I want to press the trigger immediately. All right?
I think your dot should look like a bouncing ball. It's like, the ball keeps bouncing. The ball sits here like this, probably waste of time, right? And that's also not the aggressive. If you're training yourself to react every time that sight drops down, you pull the trigger, then shoot that pace, because that's what you're training for, right? And we'll work through whatever problems come up.
All right? Playing that weird vision game, right? Where you think you're target focused, but what you're actually target sight, and at some point you're squeezing in there.
No, at this point they're trying to stay on the target and they're getting pissed. Like the sights that they're issued are like fucked. Honestly.
Yeah, the high vis sight.
Honest to God.
Yeah, and I think the high vis sight anyway, like the way it's designed, like it actually hits low, right? You got to post in the notch, but then the impact, right, is right on where that color is. Is that what you guys are experiencing?
It's actually a little bit mean to issue them those sights.
And then my grip, I'm going too far down, and then I'm like, oh, I gotta find the sight, bring it back up.
So you're doing the thing where you're changing, like you're messing
Yeah.
with your firing.
Like my
all of
yeah.
this needs to stay the same. You start just torquing one hand around, it's like that's game over. That's like if you're shooting your long gun and you're like you don't like what the gun's doing, you just start messing with this, like pulling it around. It's like that is never good.
A lot of it, you have to conceptualize. One part of the grip is the pressure you're feeling in your hands, but then also engagement in the forearms, right? Like how much are those wrists locked, right? And in my mind, you want to lock them really early on in the draw sequence, right? In that position where you present the gun very, very flat, right? So a lot of it, another thing to tie all your conscious thought to, right, is the grip pressure is good, and then focus on kind of forearm engagement and keeping those wrists very, very still. And what you'll see is a nice, consistent return of the front sight. All right.
All right, we're going to talk about dry fire and trigger control quickly. Now we have a pattern on the targets, like you know what you're doing, I hope, at this point on your target. Most dudes, they're shooting their gun straight, except for occasionally they push one a little bit to the side with their firing hand, right? That's the normal deal. Some people have a problem with what they're looking at. It's tough to stay connected to that black spot. Okay, so we're going to do some dry fire, and this will be a rule that applies to all your dry fire. It's like, if you assess, like, yep, my dry fire looks good, like when I'm doing it, I know you're doing it wrong, right? This will sound a little wonky, but when you're dry firing, you should see the same mistake that you know you're making with live ammo. Like I view it as accurately simulating what I'm doing. So the classic example is, hey, I know I'm jerking those shots down. I know I'm doing this. So what is the normal thing people do to fix that? Come on. Yeah, just like, oh, we got to pull it straight. Press, 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 press. Oh, dude, I am a stud now. My dick is so long. But that's not a realistic assessment of what's happening, is it? Oh shit, was this the serious half of the day? I can't remember. No. But that's how people think. That's how they're like, oh man, like it's so good, nothing moves, boom, it's perfect. But that's not realistic. You have to actually, simulate what you're doing. For me, normal trigger control, if it's like a complex multi-shot drill, always with my Glock gun comes up and I'm gonna do it like this. Press, press, press. You see my finger coming off the trigger and I'm pressing in very hard. What I'm assessing, looking at the sights, is as I'm mashing back on the trigger, is the dot staying relatively still or am I pushing the thing sideways like this, right? So that's like general trigger control. That's what I would do. For this, we'll do an exercise where you're gonna hear a beep, react to that, and press the trigger back, just like so. I'll demonstrate for you. I think you'll find this very useful. I'm gonna look at a spot, finger just touching the trigger at the tone, I rip it back. What this helps you do when there's no recoil, it helps you isolate your fingers, right? Without the gun bucking around, you can really feel what your fingers are gonna do. That last one looked good. Let's see this next one. Just like you can see, right? You can see what's happening, I can see what's happening, but more importantly, you can feel what your hand is doing, okay? So for all of your dry fire, make sure you're accurately simulating whatever the issue is, for one. Make sure it's fast and aggressive, like the same pace that you're gonna really be shooting. And then the other thing, when we do this, it'll be finger just out of contact with the trigger, just touching at the tone, press straight away. Does that make sense to everybody? Like, do you want, how many of you feel like if you do dry training, like it's kind of disconnected from your live fire? It's like you feel, it feels different, right?
Yeah, it's easy.
Yeah, so that's telling you the dry fire's not right. It's like, to me, if I do dry fire, like going hard, okay, like you can see I'm using a lot of, like for what I've got, I'm using a lot of muscle. I'm doing it really aggressively. I can do 15, 20 minutes at like full rip like that, and then I get tired. I don't feel it's easier because my assessment is brutal. Like I'm really rough on what I'm seeing, and then I'm making sure the pressures and the pace are correct. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, for Matt and I, when we're pulling the trigger, I think we do it the same way. I'm gonna take the pressure and stack it onto the trigger like so. If my trigger's 6 pounds, I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pounds, and it'll go off. It will not be on or like off on like that. I don't think of it like an on-off switch. If you do that, as soon as you see the sight flash where you want, then you go, and you'll push that shot low usually. All right, so I try to stay away from that kind of thinking. I'll just roll pressure onto the trigger. If the target's at 5 yards, it'll look like that. If the target's at 25 yards, it'll look like that. It's just a little bit slower and more careful as the distance and difficulty increases. No different for you, I don't think, Matt.
No. So let's talk about assessing a bad rep versus a good rep in dry fire.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of guys will focus on their dry fire, right, of the idea of you're racing some time, right? I want to do this one skill in under this time, right? And the only assessment they apply is if I did that skill within the time standard, it was good. And they're not as critical as they should be on the quality of what that rep looked like. So I think for dry trigger presses, to try to do a couple, like just pull it out on the beep, just like trigger control speed. Stand by. All right, again, stand by. Look at the end of his barrel. Again. You see any movement, right? And no movement there translates to the dot. So I would even say if you're just doing trigger control at speed against a drywall with a good grip, right? And I'm just pressing on the beep. If you see that dot blip at all, that has to be considered a fail, right? Because if you're doing your part, the recoil's gone. Everything in my hands, the grip is solid, my firing hand, my trigger finger's moving independently without the other three getting involved. What ends up happening is that dot just doesn't move in the window. Any little blip, you have to consider the level of refinement that you need to do in your grip to make that go away. Does that make sense? Because as we introduce actual tension, the stress of shooting live ammo, what's going to happen is that little blip turns into like a slash, right? And as we go back, maybe you're holding the alphas at 3, 5, 7, and 10, 15. Now we're Charlies. Anything past, we're dipping it way down into the deep.
Like dry fire, there's no recoil. Like all of the conditions are. It's like you're usually in your air-conditioned house, right? It's not going to get easier. So I want to be as good as I can be, because as we add in live ammo and add in pressure, it only gets harder, right?
Yep.
Okay, let's go to the green line, and we'll do trigger control at speed. We can get everybody up online, and
You'll notice like nothing that we haven't really talked about. I don't kind of believe in training this as part of courses. Like we're not going to really hit on gun draws and reloads. I'm under the mindset, I think Ben is too. The way gun handling works, all of that stuff needs to be done in dry fire, right? And whatever you came to the range with today, no matter how much we do it, if we just did reloads for an hour, you're going to leave with what you came with, right? Typically, if you've seen that gun handling in live fire, you'll get a couple good reps, and then the rep quality will just degrade. Has that been anybody's experience? One thing we can do is what I'm seeing is if we change the pace of the shooting or the targets move far away, how does that affect your draw, or how should it affect your draw? It shouldn't. But what actually happens? Right, because if I want to shoot a target where Ben is, right, my draw is probably going to look like this. Right, it's going to be nice and fast, good consistent rate of shoot. But if I want to shoot that trash barrel down there, a lot of guys often do this. Right, we got to separate. I think we're missing like an opportunity here where even though we're shooting doubles or we're shooting reactive, the start of the drill should still be very aggressive in terms of the gun handling element, right? I don't need to be aggressive with that first shot, but I want to at least check that every time. Can I make a really aggressive break for the gun, come up, build the grip at speed, and then have the gun out ready to shoot? Right? Think of how many iterations have we done? That's just a missed opportunity to exercise like really aggressive gun handling. Separate. I don't need the first shot to be fast, but if you watch Ben demo, does he draw aggressively in the demos? Even when he draws really aggressively and then it just waits and then he slides into the drill, right? And I think in terms of a training methodology, that's pretty good, right? Every rep, if I'm going to shoot reactive shooting, still on the buzzer, the initial break for the gun and the draw is going to be really, really aggressive. Now the gun's out, now I start shooting the drill. Does that make sense? But you're missing an opportunity to assess the quality of that aggressive draw, right? I think in my opinion, in the practical world, draw speed is way fucking overemphasized. Right? Outside of classifiers, is the speed of your draw that big of a deal?
no, I think the speed isn't a big deal, but the consistency and quality is a big deal. And obviously, we want people to be able to do both. Where it's like you could draw the gun pretty aggressively, and the gun comes up and say, "Yeah, the grip's consistent, durable, stable," and all that stuff. And probably a third of the guys here, we're seeing you shoot effectively, but it's like you draw like that and then slide into the drill. It's like it should get to a place eventually where you're doing both, where it's like, yeah, you're drawing the gun aggressively the way I know how, my grip is what it needs to be, and it's not so much the time. It's like, are you doing a good draw that's aggressive?
Yeah.
Whether it's 0.9 seconds or 1.1, that's not a huge deal.
Yeah, I'll value consistency of gun handling over speed of gun handling any day. Right? Consistent and efficient gun handling, the sad fact is, that ends up measuring very, very fast. Right? A good fast draw with a missed grip, that's just looks good on Instagram, doesn't really translate well when we're trying to shoot a lot of shots very, very quickly. Does that make sense? I think it's just worth talking about that real quick. But again, dry gun handling, that's stuff that has to be done in dry fire. Whatever you brought to the range today, unfortunately, that's what you're going to do.
Can I say this? Like, the other thing you need to go to dry fire with is, hey, here's how it feels to have my gun grip properly. Here's the mount pressure that I found works best for me with my rifle. You need to repeat that dry. You don't need ammo to just like, yep, that's the mount. Yep, that's you do that like pretty regularly for a couple weeks until you got it internalized. Then you come out, you can shoot more complex drills. You can't consciously focus on your mount and some other element, right? So the mount, the grip has to be consistent. And that's how you're going to build better technique. Nobody has enough ammo to do all this stuff. You gotta green it with my ammo.
Makes sense. All right, let's come down to the 10-yard. We're gonna flip over to do some reactive shooting with the rifle. So now we're getting more in line with kind of engagement strategies, right? I think reactive, we use predictive shooting with the rifle to fix foundational skills, and I believe that's the best way to train this. But if you carry a rifle for a living, or you're ever going to use this rifle, in an engagement, now we're getting into how we actually shoot at high levels of accountability, reacting to every sight picture, right? I just think that's the responsible way to think about the rifle, right? You can get into a lot of trouble with errant shots, so we want very high levels of accountability of where each bullet is going. To talk about reactive shooting, I think we got to talk about how we present the rifle. For this class, we're only going to really focus on low ready, but as gun professionals, you carry a rifle for a living, how many different ready positions do you need to be good at? Yeah, all of them, right? It just takes, there's different cues for some of them. Point this way, Ben. Right, so we're gonna start with the guns all kind of low ready. We're gonna start with it angled at 45 degrees. Not that this is a viable start position in any way. I think more often than not, in an operational context, you spend more time kind of in the hunt like this, and the presentation is much, much shorter, right? But what we want to do is we want to induce angular movement into the gun so that we can work on stopping the gun very precisely on an intended point of aim, right? Talk just how I present the rifle. So I keep the buttstock very deep in my shoulder, connected to the rifle on standby. For me, the gun comes up level, stops at level, and then it's obviously well below my eye target line. To get the rifle up to my eye target line, I simply shrug my left shoulder a little bit, allows me to keep my head up, and moves the rifle right up to my eye line very precisely. I just blend those two skills together, and my presentation looks like this. Right, stopping the gun very precisely on my intended point of aim. The goal is to use just enough force to raise the gun up to where I can stop it on an exact spot that I'm looking at. What do we see often with very quick, aggressive presentations? Right? Gun comes up over the target, right? So I'll be down like this, gun comes up above the point of aim and then stops. Right? What do we think that does in terms of time? It wastes a ton of time. I think depending on how aggressive that movement is, if you're programmed to shoot your vision and you're not going to pull the trigger till the dot's there, it can really quickly change like a 7/10 presentation into well over a second.
Or you just pull the trigger anyway and the hits are rando.
Right. So the concept behind this is I want to be ready to shoot sooner so I don't have to shoot faster. Right? That's a theme in the practical world that I think you apply to a bunch of different elements of gun handling. If we look at target to target transition, it's the same concept, right? Snapping the gun over from one target to the other generally never works out well because there's too much refinement that has to happen on that second target, right? We want precision and very precise gun movements above everything else. Does that make sense? So now in terms of time, I think when we look at presentations 100 yards and in, the goal needs to be that we can present the rifle to a first shot in under a second. I don't think that's a heavy lift. 10, 20, 30, 40, now we're looking at presentations around 7/10 are very, very good, right? The way that we get there is not by moving the gun fast or faster, it's just stopping the gun precisely. Yeah? All right, make a demo. So for this, I'm focusing on stopping my dot on the aiming reference. I'm not paying attention to the holdover. I know the shots are going to be a little bit low. What I'm assessing is that I'm stopping the dot on that aiming reference and then pulling the trigger. Okay? Force does it look like I'm putting into the gun? Looks pretty lazy, right? What do you see in terms of barrel movement? Does it look like it's coming above the aim? How quickly am I shooting as soon as the gun stops? Those are the concepts we really want to drive home with this. All right, you guys can stay loaded. We're going to go through it a little bit dry, and what I want you to do is purposefully play with how much force. I want you to throw it up there hard and assess what that dot does. Do them purposefully wrong sometimes, right? So you'll see what it takes in terms of refinement, right? Ideally, if I'm not connected to the rifle before I start and I'm trying to apply pressure while I'm presenting the gun, we'll get them coming up laterally. For right-handed shooters, they typically come up to about the 11 o'clock, right? And then we're having to do vertical refinement as well as lateral refinement. And all of that stuff just starts eating up time. Does that make sense? All right, let's line it. We'll line everybody up to go through it dry. Do not, when we're presenting it, don't even flip it off safe. Don't touch the trigger. We're only isolating the gun movement piece of this.
Okay, so your start point for this exercise is firm connection, right? And a lot of you guys are trying to connect and bring the rifle up, and it's too much. It's like too many moving parts at once. So just start firm connection, shrug the gun up to where you're looking, and like, from a training perspective, what I do then is go from there to, like, honestly more difficult start positions. I think if I'm picking my gun up off of the table to start with, I'll pick it up, like grip it, form a connection, mount, shrug up. It's like there's a lot of things that have to happen there to be right to make that perfect every time. So the start, like, then you just reverse engineer it. The start point there for your training is, all right, firm connection, shrug it up. And then if you want to like work other start positions, you just back off more from there. Is everyone tracking that? There's a lot of people being inconsistent here because they're trying to like connect, mount, shrug.
So think we're stressing this, right? We're trying to develop a good training scar. You think of it in terms for the law enforcement guys or anyone. If we know there's someone in the woods that we're going to go get, right? And we get to the wood line, how connected to the rifle are you going to be when you walk into the woods? So why would we do it different on the ring? Does that make a lot of guys? We're given plenty of time in between reps, so we'll do one, right? Boom, 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 boom. Come down, completely relaxed, right? All right, shooters ready? Stand by. The connection is set. The stance is good. Connection is set. And then on the drill, now I'm just presenting, shooting it, and then going back to relax. Does that make sense? If we start applying pressure to the gun, as we're presenting it, I believe we're just doing too much, right? When we're already when it's close to our shoulder. Now, obviously, for a high ready thing, if that's something that you like, right, to shoot from the high ready. Now we have other elements we have to pay attention to. Right from here, now I need to clear real estate. I need to get the buttstock out forward of my shoulder, right? Bring it back into connect. But from this point, what does it look like? Looks like a normal presentation, right? But now this is why I think the high ready is sometimes gets overvalued as it's going to be a good technique, right? A lot of people look at it like this is somehow safer in a confined space, right? But if I put this barrel up and I'm moving around people, where does the bullet go? Right, I don't understand this, right? To me, this is a technique that's built from a service that attacks a ship from the water, right? If I come to a high ship from the water, where's the threat? Right? Anybody ever tried to hold security like this for very long? You get tired, right? So if I'm gonna go into a less ready to shoot posture, but I'm still holding security on it, this makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? To me, from the early 90s, that's where this technique comes from, right? And the idea that I'm gonna strike with the gun or any of that shit, like that's like something a system that someone's selling. Could you do it? Yeah, right? But we'll just leave that there. Or I'm gonna go off on that stuff.
No, I want to hear more.
No.
Let's go off.
So
That's why they're here.
So in terms of connection, right, where we're starting, get it, on standby, we completely connect to the rifle, good firm connection, and the presentation is just going to be much more precise. If I'm nice and relaxed, right, what I'm going to end up doing is probably connecting to the gun and pulling back with both hands, and I'm violating that principle of consistency because I'm not connecting to the rifle the same every time. Make sense? All right. Sure. All right. So watch the end of my rifle, right? Nothing changes in terms of the presentation. Back here, as we come back, what you'll notice is, do we think we need more force or less force to present the gun? Less, right? It's not moving as much when we're back here from an angular standpoint. Stopping it precisely is going to be a direct result of where you're looking on the target. If we look to the whole target, then we have to accept that it stops on the whole target. The trick with this too, at the pace we want to shoot, is that we're reacting to a good sight picture initially, and then as soon as that dot touches that point of aim again, we pull the trigger immediately. Does that make sense? So watch this first one.
Be one shot, Matt?
What's up?
One shot?
No. Okay. I'm gonna shoot 3.
3 rounds. Stand by. 3 rounds. Stand by. 6 rounds?
No. What do we think in terms of that pace?
Seems slow.
You set on the
Very
sight.
slow.
You set on the sights.
Right? What I'm saying is, yeah, I'm looking at a dot for way too long. Right? It stops, it's stable. It's a very consistent dot pattern, right? It's coming up, my normal to 1 o'clock and dropping and stopping immediately. But what happens a lot of times when we put a very high level of accountability on any drill or exercise is guys aren't comfortable with just a little bit of information. They want more information from the sights, right? In terms of pace, right, there's a lot of meat on the bone there on what we can do on the performance side.
Be ready. Stand by. Stand by.
What do we think of that pace? So to me, for my shooting specifically, that's about as fast as I can react, right? What I'm seeing is that bouncing ball over the point of aim, and I'm just reacting immediately. The gun is behaving very, very consistent. It's behaving very predictable, so I'm able to recognize a good sight picture much, much faster, right? You see how the predictive shooting feeds into reactive shooting, but in terms of accountability, I am 100% confident that those bullets are going exactly where they're going. right? At no point am I calling any of those a miss or not where I want them. Does that make sense? So we'll start off with this, be real comfortable, right? A lot of times what you'll see is that really slow pace kind of fucks things up because it gives more opportunity for you to start tracking the dot, putting input into the gun unnecessarily, right? We got to let the gun cycle do its thing, and we just need to be ready to do our thing immediately. Yeah, makes sense? All right.
How dare you?
All right. So how this is going to work with reactive shooting, we're going to shoot strings of fire that are more than 2 rounds. I think anytime we want to pressure test connection to the rifle, pressure test what we're doing visually, that we've got to do it with more than 2 rounds. Because what happens if we say, hey, just give me a reactive pair? What does that start to look like really quickly? Huh? Yeah, 1 sight picture, 2 presses of the trigger, right? And that's not what we want. Here we're going to shoot 3 rounds at 20. We go to 40. We'll shoot 4 at 40, and we'll shoot 4 at 30 and 5 at 40. All right. The goal here is that you're reacting immediately to the sight picture as soon as it's there and it's acceptable. All right. The cues that you're paying attention to: connection to the rifle. After the 3rd shot is my connection, and pressure's on the rifle the same after shot 3 as it was before shot 1. Or did something in my mount change? Did it degrade? What you'll notice as we get deep into these strings, more and more round counts, the left hand just flips off its right? It's very common, especially with the first couple shots are very consistent, right? And everything's working good, and your body's just like, yeah, and everything relaxes, and that's where we see the mistakes happen.
Have any of you seen that or felt that, where you feel like this little, like somebody flicking your shoulder, like the stock's coming off, then you want to throw a strong side shoulder into the gun? Just recognize that when that starts, what's causing that is up here. And that when you're doing this kind of stuff, like that'll never work, but it's like your body just wants to start compensating.
All right, let's get the first group up here.
Pretend not to look annoyed.
You ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, back here at 40, we're gonna shoot 5-round strings. The big takeaway from this, right? Max accountability, max control, max performance. All right. The number 1 assessment I want guys to do: I'll connect very early on standby, and then your big assessment is: does the connection change? Is it durable enough to survive 5 rounds? Assess it after the 5th shot. Is my connection to the rifle the same after shot 5 as it was before shot 1? All right, we want to build that consistency in. Make sense? All right, let's go.
We gotta call it there. I think it's a good time. Where are we at for ammo? You're out of ammo? Okay,
Honest?
No, I'm not on you.
I was gonna see how many people it took.
You got 200 rifle, and you probably have like 500 pistol or 600.
I brought 1,000. So
I brought
I got like 600.
excess.
You got a lot of pistol. Okay, we're gonna be in pretty good shape for tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll be right back here, start shooting again at 8. We'll do some target transition and movement stuff as a group, and then we'll be using multiple bays to do a lot of disconnected shooting. Any questions about anything we did today? We just went over very simple concepts: grip, mount, predictive shooting, reactive shooting. I mean, that's pretty much it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
When you look at what we've done today, we shot 2 drills, right? Just at different yard lines. We shot doubles, we shot practical accuracy with pistol and rifle, right? And I think having very simple training like that, what do you think in terms of, like, what are you guys getting out of it in terms of concepts? There's a lot to unpack, right, and work on.
shoot my rifle.
But it's all very basic skills, right? And I don't think, too, we haven't really talked about specific techniques, have we? Other than principles. We want to drive home like a principle approach to training, and then all we're showing you are techniques that we use. Like me and Ben shoot some things very similar and some things are different, right? Because it's how I'm built versus how he's built, but the principles that we're trying to achieve are exactly the same, right? And I think that's the goal with this type of training is get into a principle-based, process-driven approach and stop focusing so much on the outcome. Once we fix foundational skills, very basic foundational skills, the outcome starts to look really, really good. Make sense?
Sure.
All right, we will, tomorrow let's plan, if you guys want to just for your own planning, if you're driving in, we'll have the range open about 7:15, 7:10, 7:15. I just don't want you guys coming at like 6:50 and waiting. We'll be driving in from Salina, but we'll be here. Let's just leave we can take all of these paper targets off and just throw them into one of the bin. Everything else we'll leave out here, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Be ready to go hot at 8.
Get fired up. Hope everybody got some rest. Matt did. He's not. Okay, we're gonna start working multiple targets. So I'll make a couple demonstrations of this drill, and then we will talk about it. All right, so watch my posture, what I'm doing. Don't pay too much attention to the targets. One way to do it. Okay, so which example did you like better? Yeah. So what we're doing here, we're going to draw and shoot 6 rounds on the close target. That's not to waste ammo. That gives you an opportunity to do a lot of things that are counterproductive. So tensing up your firing hand, support hand, leaving the exercise. When you saw me do it the first time, I was like looking down. What do you think I'm looking for? This side. Yeah, I'm looking for the dot. And as soon as I saw the dot, I'm like staring at it, and then, all right. Tensing up your shoulders, counterproductive, all of that stuff. When you start shooting fast and aggressive, all the stuff that we did yesterday with your grip, with your mount, like that's where it starts to fall apart, typically. Okay, so we're going to shoot that close target with 6 rounds and try not to do any of that stuff. Just look at your spot and shoot that with your sight kind of blipping there without torquing the gun around and do anything like that. And then you look to the other target and the gun should go straight there. If you're all tense, you think the gun's going to go straight there? No. Good example for that would be if I stiffen up my arm and try to touch my nose quickly. I don't have much precision. If I relax and just touch my nose, it feels effortless and easy. Right, so all the tension that you're going to introduce there becomes counterproductive, and that's what we're going to try to work through. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, so we're going to get up on the line, shooting from the blue cones, of course. 6 on the front target, two shots on the target in the back. We'll give everybody a try on it, and then we'll do a couple little exercises, try to understand it better, and then we'll do it again. Okay, we've got a couple of little awareness drills. They're not performance exercises. We don't, strictly speaking, we don't give a shit where the bullets go. It's just so you understand what's going on. First, we're going to talk about confirmation. I think that's a little different concept than aiming. I think if you practice a lot, I think you'd all agree, you look at a spot, you draw your gun, the sights are going to show up more or less in alignment on that spot, right? You might call it like index, just that you grip the gun the same way every time. You're doing stuff consistently. You look at a spot, the gun's going to go there. Whether it's your pistol or your rifle, the mount is going to be the same, right? When you're shooting aggressively like this, especially at mid-range, close range, what you really do is look at a spot, then the sights go there, and you don't sit there lining the sights up better, do you? No, you kind of just glance at the sight, yep, the gun's pointed where I think it is, and you start shooting. So that's why I like the word confirmation a lot better, right? It's way quicker than aiming, and it's more what guys do in a practical setting. They're just going to confirm that their gun's pointed there. Now, when we start shooting faster, or for me, if I'm asking myself to shoot faster, what I'm really going to do is cut down the confirmation, right? I'm just going to confirm with less, okay? So to make an example of that, what I'm going to do is start with the gun down at a 45-degree angle. I'll be looking at the target in the back. At the start signal, I'm going to bring the gun up to my vision. When I see my red dot look like a dot in the center, I'm going to pull the trigger, okay? And that will give us some time. It will be a number. We'll see what that is. Okay.
Stand by. Stand by. Stand by.
bullets are getting stacked right next to each other, yeah? So I'm hitting what I intend to. What I saw was my dot definitely looked like a red dot, not a slash, not a streak. Like it wasn't exactly stopped and stable, but it was like, yep, that's definitely a red dot right where I'm looking. Matt, what was the number that we got there?
0.8.
Okay, 0.8 of a second. So we got the outcome we wanted, right? And like it produced a number. Okay, so on the close target, what I'm gonna do is bring the gun up to my eye target line, and I'm just gonna look for the color red. When I see red, boom, I'm gonna pull the trigger. Okay.
Stand by. Stand by. Stand by.
Okay. Now we see about a hand-sized cluster in the center. Is that acceptable for what I'm trying to do here? All right, what was the number this time?
0.6.
Okay, so that's the basic concept is like, you saw, I didn't bring the gun up faster, but as soon as the gun hit my eye target line, boom, it's going off. Because I just see a bleep of red, like, yep, now. Right, there's more you can do with this concept. Like Matt's, the reticle that Matt uses with the rifle, there's tons of ways to read that, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, but what you should start thinking about is that applying different aiming schemes for different circumstances. With the red dot on a pistol, I'll do it like just a flash of color or a streak. Okay, I might call that color confirmation, or it'll be like my red dot looks like a dot, or it'll be a stop stable red dot, right? That's kind of the ways primarily that I'm going to read it, right? With different systems, different targets, like there's a lot of ways you can do this, but you should start thinking in terms of like, what am I looking to see off the sight? Like, is that going to give me the outcome I want? And then how fast can I go? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Should we give this a try? Just like I did it, gun down at a 45-degree angle, bring the sight up, shoot, and then we'll do it on the close target. The main takeaway for most guys in a group like this will be just shooting with the flash of color at close range stuff is way faster, and that is what you should do. Make sense?
Yep.
All right, let's give it a try. All right, gentlemen, we're going to talk about going between targets. Same concept applies to tracking a moving target. When you go between targets, a lot of guys think like the mechanical speed of how they push the gun around, that is what is primary. I think the key is just look where you want the gun to go. The exercise we're going to do to highlight this is pretty simple. You're going to be looking gun and vision on a target at the tone. You shoot that shot. Again, I don't really care where that shot goes. What matters is what happens next. Is you're immediately going to shift your vision to the other target, and the gun will come to where you're looking. Okay, I'm going to do this a few different ways, and you should get a good idea of what this should look like. Matt is going to give you the beeps. All right. So watch my gun once again, how it moves between targets, and that's going to tell you what my eyes are doing. Okay.
Stand by.
Okay, so you saw it a few different ways there, right? So at the beginning and the end, it was what I would consider right, where you'd see the gun would just go off and then come down over here. Then it wouldn't move anymore. All right, that's where my eye leaves this target instantaneously. Like, boom, that shot gets fired. I'm not going to look at the target or check my work or anything like that. I'm like, I'm done. I'm going to look at the other target, and the gun drops in right where I'm looking. It's like the dot just goes bloop, right down there. Then you saw me do it differently, where I focused on the mechanical pushing of the gun, where I'd shoot and the gun would go like that and kind of wiggle around. What I'm visually seeing on that target is the dot would come over and like slash around. And the same thing we did yesterday with the rifle, where you mounted it. If you pushed it up and it was like shaking around, either you're going to just shoot that shot and you're kind of rolling the dice, casino style shooting, or you're going to wait for it to stabilize. Either way, it's not good, right? So it was the same idea, right? I saw the gun come over and shake, and it's like I could pull the trigger right then, and we'll see how it goes, or I have to wait for the gun to stabilize. Then after that, I'm like, oh shit, I'm pushing the gun around too much. Then what'd you see? The third version, what'd you see me do?
Hesitation coming up.
Yeah, it was like boom, the gun comes down, then I'd move it real carefully. And that's gonna be way too slow. You're not working at the pace of your vision there at all, in my opinion, right? So we don't want that. That was way too slow. And then I did it correctly again at the end. I'll say this, when you do this right, it feels effortless and it's almost like magic. It's like, yeah, shoot, just shift my vision and the gun goes right over there. You might see a lot of guys talk about driving the gun around. Most of the time, like that is, it's dumb, honestly. Like, because that's not what you need to do. Like if the targets are in my field of view here, like I can see all the targets I want to shoot, or there's one target that's like a running target or a swinging target or something. It's just, I just need to look at it and keep tracking that spot visually, and the gun will just go where I'm looking without any apparent effort from me. The harder I try, like to push the gun where I want it to go, you'll find that's countable. Does that make sense to everybody? We'll give it a try and we'll see for ourselves. I want to demo that 8-shot drill again, and I want you to watch close with a more trained eye. Watch how the gun moves between the targets, and watch when the gun starts shooting, both coming out of the holster and when it's on target. Okay. Okay, so I think you could more characterize what made that fast by what I'm not doing rather than what I am doing. Is that fair? Yeah, because it's like, did I get tense up and throw the gun around? When I drew the gun from the holster, to go like up over the target and come down? No, it was just clean, right? Clean technique like we've been talking about. I'm not tensed up. I'm not really trying to make anything happen. But I'm looking at the spot, as soon as I see the flash of red where I want bullets to go, like I'm on it right away. And then I look to the other target, it's like, yep, I'm on that one right away. Does that make sense, everybody? All right, let's give that a try again. All right, we're gonna start working on stance. This drill is way harder than it looks, kind of like because you're being asked to walk and chew gum at the same time. You're doing multiple things at once. It's a pretty simple thing to understand intellectually. You're gonna shoot each target with 2 rounds from one side of the stick, shoot each target with 2 rounds from the other side of the stick, total of 8 rounds, and you move once. It probably sounds easy to do, but when people, I mean, Matt can verify this. Guys, it's too much for people, yeah?
It is. It's a very simple drill on its face, but really there's a lot of layers, a lot of things that you're stringing together, and some fundamentals that you have to do kind of at that near perfect level to get the result that you want, right? Be efficient, smoothing it all out. It's much more complicated than Ben's little explanation there.
Yes, all right. So I'll make a few examples for you. Like the best? The last one, yeah. Now I started off to like shooting with my stance fucked up too. We'll talk about this in a second. My stance too narrow. Shoot, dismount the gun, move, shoot again. That's not what we want. The next example, I had my stance good, feet set wide, shoot, move. When I get all tucked into my stance over the stick, I'm like, oh, okay, I feel comfortable. Now I can start shooting again. And then finally you saw what we want, which is everything is fluid, it's strung together. There's multiple things happening at the same time. So what we want is that low, wide, aggressive posture. Matt talked about it a lot yesterday with your rifle. You want to see that now with your handgun shooting. Feet spread apart, knees bent, ready to move. That's kind of the part that matters to me, is like you stop ready for the next movement. Even in training, if you don't have to move again, you build the habit where you stop ready for the next movement. The idea is if I stand like this, I'm gonna shoot some stuff like, oh, I need to be over there now. Everybody will do this. They'll coil up like a spring, kick their foot out, and then take off. And we would say, hey, all that time's wasted. Just kind of start, like be comfortable shooting like this. Then when it's time to move, You don't have to adjust anything. You're just away you go, any direction you have to move. Does that make sense? Now that's easy to understand intellectually, but like building up the habit of where you're going to be shooting. Okay, shooting. I want to stop here. Okay, and I need to be able to stop properly while I'm shooting at the same time. There's a lot of circumstances, both in the practical world and in Matt's world, where you're going to be moving with a gun, engaging a target, and then you're going to be stopping simultaneously. All right. So like that's kind of what we're working on here. You'll be using this skill later on today. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody?
Over the lateral.
Oh yeah, lateral. Like, for whatever reason, maybe Matt, you can speak to this. Became like against the rules with a lot of military dudes. It's like against the rules to cross your feet.
Yeah, you guys have all heard that, right? Don't cross your feet. But how many times do you think you cross your feet throughout the day? Right? Like if I'm just standing here and I need to go rehab the target, will it look weird if I was like, right? The natural thing is make the movement, or the easiest thing is make the movement as natural as possible. Oh, I need to go over there? Oh, okay. I'm not gonna fall down. You know, that the idea from not crossing our feet is like an organizational issue where it's one guy training like 40. So I need them all to do the same thing, right? And I need it to be safe. So this is going to be safer than watching 40 different guys do this. But in terms of what's going to feel the most natural, if I'm on one side of the stick, right? And the main premise of this exercise is that I want to start and stop and be in the same position, right? So if I don't cross my legs and I want to go with my lead leg out, watch what happens. This is my pistol's out. Watch how much movement is in my pistol.
What do you think that looks like on the target? Again, it's casino style, right? You can shoot when your dots slash around the target, and it's like rolling the dice. Maybe it'll be good, maybe not. Or you can wait,
Yeah.
in which case you'll be slow.
So if my feet are nice, low, and wide, this stance, and I want to be in this stance on this side, how far does this leg need to move?
A couple inches.
No. It needs to move double this distance, right? Because this is my outside leg, so I've got to step to make room to be in the same position. What you'll see a lot is when guys go with the lead leg, they'll just step across and they'll be in this position. And then, like Ben just taught, if I'm going to leave really quickly, what do?
Coil up.
I'll boom, I'll get into the stance I should have been in, and then take off. The easiest answer is just to naturally step across the stick.
Yeah. If you find that difficult, as a lot of people do, especially like right-handed moving left, I'll just move forward a little. Right? So I'll just angle forward slightly, and that's very easy. Right, I'll make a couple examples for you. Time was good. They never said no go, just from the stance perspective. Let's do it again. Same time, right? Did you like my foot position better? Yeah, and the time's measured to within 400ths of each other. Right? So it's like, again, there's the time, there's the hits we're considering, but also how your foot position at the end. It's like you want it to be productive and work for you.
One of the things that'll end up happening is as soon as the movement starts, right, what do you think happens on the aiming scheme side? It's going to get shaky, right? You're not going to be comfortable, right? You're not going to be comfortable with what the dot is telling you, the feedback in terms of aiming solutions. So what happens when that's the case?
You slow down.
Slow down. Visually, what do guys do?
Wait to over
They'll
confirm.
stare at the dot, right? As soon as the dot moves, and what we'll find is when I'm starting to move, right, if I stare at you and I just move naturally, right, my thumb is right over your chest, as I move, I'm just going to track you the whole time, right? It's not going to feel as comfortable visually dealing with that little bit of information, but if I start to stare at my finger as I'm moving, right, I drag it right off the target and I have to actively push it back on. So just one little cue to pay attention to, right? Connection to the target is going to be extremely valuable with this to get the result that you want. The hard part is going to be you're not going to want to stay connected to the target. You're going to want, as soon as that little bit of movement starts, and we're really only testing shooting while moving with 3 rounds. Shots 5, 6, and 7 is going across, right? So all the cues that we talked about, you know, with predictive shooting, connection to the target, being focused on the target, aware of the dot, all that plays in here once we start moving. Make sense? All right, let's line up. If you've run it a few times horizontal and you want to change the stick, by all means, you can change it from stepping forward to stepping lateral. And immediately push off, right? I'm gonna look to where I wanna go and push with no foot shuffle. Any other movement of my feet, right, where I'm loading, adjusting to leave, that is all time on the clock where I'm not gaining forward ground, right? So now, athleticism has a lot to do with it, right? An NFL athlete is gonna be able to do all kinds of weird shit with his feet and stay here for a little bit and still crush every one of us, right? But in terms of efficiency, any movement that I'm doing, rifle or pistol, I shoot, I look to where I want to go, no loading of the legs, they should already be loaded, and I push off and go aggressively. All right, this is what we're assessing here, right? Start position is this. As soon as I step across the stick, am I in that same position if I wanted to sprint out of here? That should be the cue, right? Then the element is all, the shooting side of it is all that stuff we've been talking about. Connection to the target, foundational skills, right? We're just layering a bunch of stuff together. Make sense?
Yes.
All right.
We're telling you to like shoot aggressively. You got to start moving. I promise you, a lot of tension is working its way into you that you're not aware of, just because of how much stuff is happening. Okay. So try to stay relaxed. Look where you want the gun to go, and if you see your sight slashing around the target, that's almost always caused by getting tense and throwing the gun around, stuff like that. All right, let's give it a try. Come on up.
Matt is upset, so he wants to talk about something. He's so mad.
Sorry, Matt.
Don't apologize to Matt.
Don't put, I'm gonna try to I'll make him upset. Don't worry.
So what I'll see a lot of guys doing is with this drill, we've got to, two things, we got to disconnect what's happening below our waist with what's happening above our waist, yeah? Right, the movement has got to be separate than from the shooting as well. What I see a lot of guys doing is they're coming up, and because the targets are perceived as easy, the tendency is I want to come up and shoot a predictive pair at one target, transition, shoot a really fast pair on the other target, then move and do the same thing again. So that real aggressive shooting like that is fine to do, but what do you think what does that do to the movement? Does it make the movement smoother or more choppy?
Choppy.
More choppy, right? Because at that pace, most people, it's fine if you want to shoot predictive pair. The problem is people can't do the transition part or the movement part to match that pace of the shooting, right? So now everything gets tied together. My legs are tied to the upper body, and it ends up being very, very choppy, right? And I think also in terms of accuracy, it's much, much worse. Right, so this is what I'll see a lot of guys doing. Control, you hear the long pause in between the targets, right? In my mind, that doesn't ever measure very good, right? About 3.5 seconds. Now I'm just gonna shoot still aggressively, right? But more of a continuous aiming strategy that the shooting is gonna be smoother in hopes of smoothing some of the movement. In terms of time, it's about 3/4 of a second faster. But which one sounded fast versus which one that was actually fast? And when I shoot at that pace with the movement, right, and it's all kind of smooth out, what do I think I'm introducing to myself? Am I out of control or in control? Control. I feel more in control at that pace than trying to throw predictive pairs in. Now the goal is for this drill to be efficient and smooth, right? Lower body's disconnected from the upper body. I'm starting and stopping in the same position. There's a lot of things that we're paying attention to, which in terms of efficiency, the more that I can smooth all of that out, one, it's gonna measure faster. What I get from it is I feel like I'm in way more control. With just like a very aggressive, it's still an aggressive shooting pace in my mind, but it's like a continual aiming process. Does that make sense? Where I'm shooting kind of at the pace that I know I can move. The split times and transition times can become very, very close.
Yeah, I think a lot of what happens is people get it in their head that they're going to shoot an aggressive pair, and then what do? 10 seconds, like pair. You know, and all that tension comes into your body because you're not comfortable, you know, shooting a predictive pair and moving and like maintaining the correct tension. So it is a tension issue, but like Matt's saying, it just becomes easier if you just can try to make it fluid and shooting continually.
Yeah. You can always introduce more and more performance into it, right? And then kind of balancing what is that doing visually, what's it doing on the marksmanship side, did it fuck the movement up, right? But if we can't shoot it in a very smooth, efficient way as a start point, then as we put more and more emphasis or performance into the shooting, it just more stuff breaks down, right? It's good, we're making mistakes, we're identifying the mistakes, but a lot of guys are making mistakes that shouldn't be present in this drill, right? Guys that normally have really good, start a good posture, you know, upper platform like this, shooting, shoot, and as soon as they stop, they end like this, right? Or kind of on the flip side, guys start nice and loaded, boom, 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 and when they finish, they're standing upright, right? It's a lot of things that we don't want from this drill. Start and stop point, we want to be exactly the same, right? When I finish the drill, the first assessment I should do is my stance and my low and wide. Could I explode out of this position if I needed to? All right, let's shoot some more. All right, guys, so we're going to start to focus on how we'll apply the skills in the context of like a longer exercise, right? Primarily predictive and reactive shooting with the focus on this afternoon. We'll shoot CQB warm-up for score. So we're going to isolate the 40-yard line, most importantly, the first 4 shots, right? I think the 40-yard line is difficult for a lot of guys to kind of balance speed and accuracy, you know, and conceptualize what's happening at this distance shooting very, very aggressive.
Has everybody heard of CQB warm-up at least?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, that's right, that's going to be the tough part of the 40-yard.
So what happens at 40, the way the times are broken down, it's 2 rounds on each target standing, 2 rounds on each target prone, in a goal time or par time of 6 seconds. So how that breaks down is we have 2 seconds to engage each target twice, 2 seconds to get into the prone, and just under 2 seconds to finish the engagement with 2 rounds on each target. We're only going to focus on the standing part. Think of some of the things we've talked about in terms of presenting the gun. Can we start to see how valuable presenting the gun and getting on target in under a second can be? Right? Now, how about we talk about the pace of shooting back here? What do you think it looks like? Right? I think it's on the higher end of predictive, right? You could shoot it right, pretty fast reactive or pretty slow predictive, however you look at it, right? The way this exercise is set up, it's to emphasize, you know, controlled aggressive shooting, consistent gun handling, and then everything else from movement needs to be done very, very aggressively. All right? Let me see, this is what we're gonna shoot back here. First shot presentation came way up above the target, right? And you see that pause, all that settling for it to get in there, right? That would be not ideal. That time, that extra 1200s that I give back in that string, I've got to steal that somewhere else, right? And that's something that we don't want to do. First times, the 190s, 180s, what does that pace sound like? Does it sound very fast? Yeah, it's right on the edge of kind of predictive and reactive. I feel real confident on what the dot's doing. It emphasizes all of the skills that we've talked about, right? Very consistent dot tracking pattern, huge emphasis on connection to the target, right? And a very precise presentation, right? We're stringing a bunch of things together now. We're gonna shoot this probably a mag and a half worth for each guys, giving you times, focusing on beating that 2-second time, right? So for CQB warm up, and I think as we start to apply, you know, very aggressive performance-based shooting, the times need to really quickly become non-negotiable, right? Otherwise, if we don't work to get this done in 6 seconds and we give 9 seconds, what does that do to the shooting? No, it changes it, right? The time exists to force you to shoot in a way that you're uncomfortable, that you should be uncomfortable shooting. That's the real work on the training side of it, right? That's why the time exists. It's not that that is a time that is from any real life situation or anything like that. The time, the reason they have to be non-negotiable is we're trying to test connection to the rifle, predictive and reactive shooting, right? All tying a bunch of those skills together in the context of longer and longer exercises.
Well, think about it like this. As soon as you start shooting faster, the recoil from the previous shot starts to mess with you, right? And then the recoil from the shots you're anticipating, that starts to be a problem. So when you're going like boom, 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 when you're shooting fast, that stuff starts to bother you. As soon as you add time, and then you can shoot and like let the sight settle, pull the trigger slow, and you take away that recoil management element, it becomes way easier.
Yeah. Any questions on what we're going to be doing over here?
You set a 2-second timer on the back end so we know where we're at?
Yep, there'll be par times. We're actually going to shoot this in a descending par. So we'll start off at 240, we'll go to 220, we'll end up at 210, or 2 seconds. Right, so that guys, we'll do some dry so you can see what the time that we're dealing with, conceptualize how long that is in dry, and then we'll just keep pushing and pushing until we get down to those times. All right?
Let's go over here. All right. This exercise here, we're going to start working on tracking a spot. All right, so you see yesterday when we had the aiming references out, the power of focusing on a small spot on the target, right? Yes, I hope so. This morning we did a drill where we went from one target to another, started adding in some tension, and you saw like, oh, it's difficult. I mean, you got to be careful not to over tense and throw the gun around. Like, the more you're asking of yourself in terms of speed and in terms of like going between targets, it becomes harder and harder. We're gonna make it harder still. So I'm gonna be looking to small spots on the target. Each target gets shot with 2 rounds. I'm gonna shoot the left target from the left side of the barrels, the right target from the right side of the barrels. The 2 targets in the middle get shot in the middle. This is gonna introduce a little bit of movement. When you start moving around and you feel uncomfortable, you're probably gonna wanna stare at your sight. I'll make a demonstration for that. And then I have to, like, the vision barriers are not here to be covered or anything like that. They're there to force you to work visually to find the spot on the target. I'm going to start so I can see the target on the left. I cannot see the targets in the middle from where I'm standing. Okay, so I got to work for it. I got to go find that spot. All right, I'll make a couple examples for you. The dot. And because I'm moving, now it's like, ooh, I feel uncomfortable. Do you think I was shooting like color shoot on the target? Or, yeah, it was like dot, press, dot, press, dot, press. Okay, I'll try to shoot a little more fluidly now. the red flashing on the target, I'm gonna like, yep, right now I'm gonna start shooting. It was much faster and more fluid, yeah. And then to me, I'm gonna shoot it aggressively like that. If I'm getting hits on the edge, like around the A zone, I'm just gonna look. I'm like, what I'll focus on training is looking at that spot in the center. We'll shoot this with rifle as well. All right. I think, in my opinion, it's even harder than with a pistol because your mount is gonna have to stay consistent. Right. So yesterday we worked a lot on connection, mount, all this, and all of this pressure from my support side. And my connection to the rifle, like my whole upper body, in my opinion, has to stay pretty stable. Like if I start torquing around or flexing or something, that will be a problem. So I'll make an example of this. Does that make sense to everybody? Again, there's a lot happening here. It's picking out a spot on the target. Look at where you want to go. Don't throw your gun around. All right, keeping that platform relaxed. Reacting when you see your sight flashing in the center of the target. Not getting pulled onto the sight because you're moving. All of these different things happening at once. This is way more challenging than it looks, I think. Sound good? We're gonna shoot it. I think ammo-wise, we should have about a mag and a half for a rifle on this, and then as much pistol as you want to shoot. I think that should leave you enough for what we want to do in the afternoon.
Yeah, ideally, kind of look at your ammo. We want CQB warm-up is going to take, like everybody, run it twice, so that'll be 72 rifle rounds for that exercise. So we would definitely want that. You keep 100 rifle set aside, and then everything else for rifle will burn up on track the A zone and the 40-yard line.
Or you can just give it to us too. We'll take it. No. It's just a suggestion.
Ruining another video, isn't he?
I think it enhances the video.
Tatum.
All right, gentlemen. We're going to make a demonstration for CQB warm-up. It's a lot of strings from 40 yards working your way up to 7 yards. You don't need to memorize it. I'm going to call it all off. I'll be calling it all off while you do it, or Matt will call it off while you do it. Just like watch and get a sense of it. You already tried predictive shooting at 40 yards. That's going to be really where the time crunch is, aside from the manipulations up in the front. All right. Anyway, first string. Standing, 2 rounds on each target. You'll prone out, 2 rounds on each target. 6-second par time. This one's tight. Be ready. Stand by. Curious, that was 591, just under the 6-second par. You gotta be on it to make the time here. All right, it'll be 2 shots on each target. Standing. Move to the 20. 2 shots on each target. You ready? Stand by. Two shots on each target from the 20. Move to the 10. 2 shots on each target. Stand by. Three shots on each target. Rifle should go to bolt lock. Transition to your pistol. 3 shots on each target. You ready? Stand by. Start standing, finger on the trigger, rifle pointed at the target. At the tone, transition to your pistol, 3 shots on each target. Stand by. Start standing, finger on the trigger, rifle pointed at the target, rifle at bolt lock, at the tone, reload the rifle, 3 shots on each target. Stand by.
All right, come up and score it. So what we should have is 18 rifle, 6 pistol on each target. Count them down. Alphas are worth 5, Charlies are worth 3, Deltas are worth 1, or down 2 and down 4. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That ends up being a 230 out of 240 with all the part times made.
Right. This is challenging. I mean, so what do you think? So we've shot this or had guys in class shoot it a lot over the last couple weeks. Well, on like a full-time SWAT team, like what percentage of guys passed it, man?
Probably about 25% of DPD SWAT was able to pass it. It's really, if you can string together a bunch of skills, right? Very basic skills. Just do them very well, you know, kind of that near perfect. And then what CQB warm-up favors, right, is really aggressive shooting, consistent gun handling, and then everything that's not shooting, doing it as fast as you can, right? Lots of aggression in the movement, right? You notice when I'm running from 40 to 20, as I get to 20, I'm decelerating into position, connected to the rifle, so as soon as my feet stop, I'm able to start shooting.
What drill does that look like that we did today?
The bar.
Yeah, the bar. The bar hop, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, let's get, we'll run it 5 guys at a time. So you'll see with 5 guys running it, there will be a time where we are shooting at disconnected yard lines. All right. Rely heavily on everybody. When you're done shooting, weapon goes on safe, finger straight off the trigger. When I'm moving from 40 to 20 or 20 to 10, how is my rifle pointed? Down at the ground, right? I'm maintaining control of it. The muzzle is down to the ground and I'm still pumping my arms, trying to move as aggressively as my old ass can. All right, maintain control of your rifle. The weapon's on safe, finger straight off the trigger. Regardless of what happens, we're not gonna have an accident if we don't violate those rules. Make sense? All right, let's meet me back. We'll take this up, back at 40, get it going.
And action.
That turns into me with the exhaustion.
Hey man, again, I appreciate you guys coming out. I know a lot of you guys traveled a long ways and I know this stuff's expensive, but I really appreciate the enthusiasm everybody had. 2 hot days. Completely my fault for booking courses in Texas in June, but I will say in my defense, when I booked them, the weather was perfect. So that kind of messed me up. Again, hopefully, the course made sense. The intent of what we are trying to deliver to you guys is a very principle-based approach and get people more in tune with their actual own training, right? And kind of connecting, you know, what's happening, what you're feeling in terms of pressures, whether it's grip of the pistol, mount of the rifle, tying that together with your vision, right? And starting to understand how mistakes, when they happen and how they happen, what causes them. That's kind of the goal.
Big thing, take to your dry fire. I mean, I would write it down on fresh. Like, hey, I want to change this with the way I'm gripping the pistol. I want to change this thing that I'm doing visually. And you can really just paying attention to one thing in your dry fire, one thing at a time. And that was the big thing today, is that everything that we did was there was multiple elements in play at a time. And that's where you saw what you could really do in terms of abilities. Right? I mean, you got to put under some stress and some like multifaceted drills, and then you're like, yep, okay, I got this problem or this happened or this thing I gotta work on. And really the place to do that is drive, I think.
Yeah. Going forward, if you need any questions, anything you have, feel free to reach out to me, whether it's on social media. If you want my phone number, I'll give you. I think everybody got the email right for the class. My phone number's in there, or hit me up, email, phone, doesn't matter. If there's something that you have in terms of training that I can't find answer to, you know, I have access to some of the best guys in the world. We'll figure it out, you know, to help you guys. Big thing is, like, everybody's on their own little shooting journey at their own pace, right, with no discernible endpoint, right? We're all doing kind of the same shit, trying to get better and trying to figure it out. So the most that we can do to help each other out, that's kind of what we're all about. Again, I appreciate the enthusiasm. Thanks for getting everything cleaned up so good. Greenville will be happy. But again, thanks for coming out. I had a great time. An honor training with you guys.